I watched the paramedics load two stretchers into the same ambulance side by side. The neighbors were gasping, covering their children's eyes and whispering behind their hands. But the two people on those stretchers were not injured, at least not in the way you might think. They were screaming at the firefighters to be careful, their faces twisted in a mix of agony and absolute humiliation. They were my wife Vivian and our new neighbor Brad. And the reason they were being loaded into the ambulance together was that they were physically stuck together, literally fused. Because 2 hours ago I found a tube of personal lubricant hidden under the passenger seat of my wife's car. I didn't get mad, I didn't scream. I simply walked into my garage, grabbed a tube of industrial-grade glass bonding adhesive, and made a little switch. What happened next didn't just end a marriage, it required the fire department to use the jaws of life to separate them. My name is Elijah Thorne. I am 72 years old, a retired master contractor, and a man who believes that if you build something, you build it to last. That includes houses, and it includes families. But I learned the hard way that you cannot build a solid foundation on a swamp of lies. Before I tell you exactly how I engineered the most permanent revenge in the history of this neighborhood, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments where you are listening from. Have you ever been betrayed by the one person you spent a lifetime providing for? Let's get into the story. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind of humid Georgia morning that makes your joints ache before you even get out of bed. I was in the driveway washing the pearl-white Cadillac Escalade I had bought for Vivian on our 40th anniversary. She loved that car more than she loved me, I suspect. I was down on my knees vacuuming the floor mats because Vivian complained if there was even a speck of dirt on the carpet. That was my life. Service. Provision. Silence. I reached under the passenger seat to grab a stray water bottle and my hand brushed against something cold and plastic. I pulled it out. It was a tube of slippery silk, a personal lubricant. I sat there on the concrete driveway holding that pink tube in my calloused black hand. The sun was beating down on my neck, but I felt cold, freezing cold. You see, that tube didn't belong to us. It couldn't belong to us. 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. The complications hit me fast. Nerve damage, circulation issues. The doctor called it erectile dysfunction. I called it the death of my manhood. When I told Vivian, she didn't offer comfort, she didn't offer patience, she just sighed, rolled over in bed and said, "Well, I guess that part of our life is over then." She made me feel like a broken tool. A discarded piece of machinery that could no longer do its job. We hadn't been intimate in 24 months. So why was there a half-empty tube of lubricant hidden under the seat of her car? I unscrewed the cap. The seal was broken. It had been used recently. I looked up from the tube and stared at the house across the street. The for sale sign had come down 3 months ago. Brad had moved in. He was 45, white flashy, drove a leased BMW, and told everyone he was a high-end real estate developer. I knew a con artist when I saw one. I had spent 50 years in construction dealing with suppliers and developers. I knew the smell of cheap drywall, and I knew the smell of a cheap man. Brad was cheap drywall wrapped in expensive wallpaper. Just then, the curtain in Brad's front window moved. I saw him. He was looking right at my driveway, right at Vivian's car. He didn't see me holding the tube because I was crouched low. He smiled, a smug, arrogant smirk. Then he winked. Not at me. At the house. At Vivian, who I knew was in the kitchen making her green smoothie. The pieces slammed together in my mind like a steel trap. The yoga classes that started 3 months ago. The new lingerie she said she bought just to feel confident. The way she started hiding her phone screen whenever I walked into the room. And the smell. God, the smell. For weeks she had been coming home from yoga, smelling not like sweat and rubber mats, but like generic men's cologne and musk. I had ignored it. I had told myself I was just a paranoid old man. I told myself that a woman of 65, a grandmother, a deaconess at our church wouldn't do this. I was wrong. I didn't storm into the house. I didn't confront her. A younger Elijah might have done that. But the Elijah of today, the man who had managed million-dollar construction sites, knew that you don't start demolition until you have a plan. I looked at the tube in my hand. Then I looked at the open door of my garage. My garage is my sanctuary. It is filled with the tools of my trade. Saws, drills, levels, and shelves of adhesives. I walked into the cool darkness of the garage, the tube of slippery silk clutched in my fist. I walked past the wood glue, past the regular super glue. I went to the back shelf to the heavy-duty section. There it was. Titan Bond 5000. This wasn't normal glue. This was a structural glazing adhesive used for bonding glass panels to skyscrapers. It was designed to withstand hurricane-force winds. It had a tensile strength of 4,000 pounds per square inch. Once it cured, it didn't let go. It required special chemical solvents or extreme heat to remove, or in some cases, surgical intervention. I sat down at my workbench. My hands, usually shaky from age and blood sugar, were steady as rocks. I squeezed the remaining lubricant out of the pink tube and into the trash can. Then I took the caulk gun loaded with the Titan Bond. I carefully injected the thick, clear adhesive into the lubricant tube. It looked exactly the same viscosity, same clear color, but one was designed for pleasure and the other was designed for permanence. I filled it to the brim. I cleaned the threads of the cap so it wouldn't stick shut. I screwed the lid back on. It looked perfect, a seamless renovation. I walked back out to the driveway. The street was quiet. I slid the tube back under the passenger seat exactly where I found it. I finished vacuuming the car. I even polished the dashboard. If you are going to do a job, you do it right. I went inside the house. Vivian was in the kitchen wearing her tight yoga pants and a fitted tank top. She looked good for 65. She spent a lot of my money making sure she looked good. She was blending kale and spinach, humming a little tune. She didn't even look at me when I entered. "The car looks clean," she said over the noise of the blender. "Spotless," I replied. I poured myself a cup of black coffee. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my voice was flat. "Calm." "Good," she said. "I need to go out later. The charity committee is having an emergency meeting. We are planning the autumn gala." Charity. That was her code word. I took a sip of coffee. The bitterness matched the taste in my mouth. "Is that right?" I asked. "You have been doing a lot of charity work lately, Viv. You are becoming a regular saint." She turned off the blender and poured the green sludge into a travel cup. She finally looked at me, her eyes scanning over my gray hair, my comfortable work clothes, my worn-out slippers. I saw the disdain in her eyes, the boredom. "Someone has to care about the community, Elijah. You just care about your old Western movies and that dusty garage. I want to make a difference." "You are making a difference." "All right," I said. I checked my watch. It was 10 in the morning. She grabbed her purse and the car keys. I noticed she had sprayed on perfume. Chanel No. 5. Who wears Chanel No. 5 to a charity meeting at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday? "Don't wait up for lunch," she said, heading for the door. "I might grab a salad with the girls afterwards." I watched her walk to the door. I knew exactly where she was going. She wasn't going to a meeting hall. She was going to pick up Brad. They probably drove to the quiet cul-de-sac behind the old park or maybe the motel off the interstate if they were feeling fancy. But judging by the tube under the seat, they liked the thrill of the car. "Vivian." I called out just as she put her hand on the doorknob. She stopped impatient. "What is it, Elijah? I am running late." I looked her dead in the eye. "Drive carefully. And be careful what you get yourself stuck into. These days, once you commit to something, it is hard to separate yourself from it." She rolled her eyes. "You are so weird when your blood sugar is low, Elijah. Eat a sandwich." The door slammed shut. I walked to the window and watched her back the Cadillac out of the driveway. She honked lightly as she passed Brad's house. A minute later, I saw Brad come out, look left and right, and hop into his BMW. He was following her. I went back to the kitchen and sat down. I didn't eat a sandwich. I sat there and waited. I knew the curing time of Titan Bond. It begins to set in 5 minutes. It reaches 50% strength in 20 minutes. Full cure in 24 hours. But for what they were doing, 5 minutes would be enough. 5 minutes to turn a moment of pleasure into a permanent medical emergency. I looked at the clock on the wall. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The house was silent, but my mind was loud. I thought about the 40 years I worked. The winters I spent on scaffolding in freezing winds. The summers I spent laying asphalt until my boots melted. I did it all for her. I put our daughter Maya through private school. I paid for this house cash. I paid for her surgeries, her vacations, her car, and she repaid me by replacing me with a 45-year-old con man who probably didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. 30 minutes passed. My phone rang. I looked at the caller ID. It wasn't Vivian. It was Jason, my son-in-law. Jason is a good man, but he is soft. He works as an EMT, a paramedic. He has seen a lot of bad things, but he is a terrible liar. I picked up the phone. "Hello, Jason." "Dad." Jason's voice was shaking. He sounded like he was hyperventilating. "Dad, are you sitting down?" "I am sitting, Jason." "What is wrong?" It is Mom. We got a call. A medical emergency. In the park. Is she hurt? I asked, keeping my voice steady. No. I mean yes. I mean, God. Dad, I don't know how to tell you this. I am on the scene. I am the lead paramedic. I tried to delegate it, but... Dad, she is in the car. Is the car crashed? No, the car is fine. Dad, she is with someone, a man. I closed my eyes and let out a long breath. I feigned shock. With a man who, it looks like your neighbor, the guy with the BMW. Okay, I said. So she is having an affair. Why are you calling me in a panic? Jason, why aren't you just angry? Because Dad... Jason's voice dropped to a whisper, a sound of pure horror. We can't get them out. We can't separate them. They are stuck. Physically stuck. We tried pulling. We tried oil. Nothing is working. It is like they are glued together. She is screaming, Dad. She is screaming that it burns. I leaned back in my chair. The Titan bond creates a exothermic reaction when it cures. It generates heat. Not enough to burn skin off, but enough to feel like fire. Well, Jason, I said calmly, if you can't pull them apart, you better bring them to the hospital. Both of them, together. But Dad, they are... naked. We have to cut the roof off the Cadillac to get the backboards in. The news crew is already here. The helicopter is overhead. Cut the roof, Jason, I said. It is just a car. Material things can be replaced. Dignity, on the other hand, is a little harder to fix. I hung up the phone. I stood up, rinsed my coffee cup, and placed it in the dishwasher. Then I went to the hall closet and put on my best suit. If I was going to the hospital to see my wife attached to her lover, I wanted to look like the only man in the room who had his life together. I grabbed my car keys. I didn't take the truck. I took my old sedan. I drove slowly, obeying every speed limit. I wanted to make sure the news crews had plenty of time to get their best angles before the grieving husband arrived. The war had just begun, and I had just fired the first shot. But I knew this wasn't the end. This was just the demolition phase. And as any contractor will tell you, demolition is always the messiest part of the job, the drive to St. Mary's Hospital felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life, even though I drove well below the speed limit. My hands were steady on the steering wheel of my old sedan, but my mind was replaying the phone call I had received just moments ago. It was Jason, my son-in-law. Jason is a good man, a sturdy man. He is the kind of guy who plays by the rules. He has been a paramedic for 10 years. He has seen pile-ups on the interstate. He has seen gunshot wounds. He has delivered babies in the back of ambulances. Nothing rattles him. But when I answered that phone, his voice sounded small. It sounded like a child who had just broken a priceless vase. Dad, he had stammered the background noise of sirens wailing behind him. Dad, you need to come to St. Mary's. Now. Do not call Maya. Please, for the love of God, do not call your daughter yet. I don't know how to explain this to her. I don't even know how to explain it to myself. I had asked him if everyone was alive. He said yes, they were alive. But the way he said it with a heavy, shuddering breath made it sound like death might have been the more dignified option. When I walked through the sliding glass doors of the emergency room, the atmosphere was wrong. Usually an ER is a place of tension, of hurried movements and serious faces. Today it felt like a circus. As I approached the nurses' station, I saw 2 young nurses huddled behind a computer monitor, their shoulders shaking. They weren't crying, they were laughing. They were trying to suppress it, covering their mouths with their hands, but the giggles escaped like steam from a kettle. I cleared my throat. The sound was low and rough, the sound of gravel crunching under heavy boots. They looked up, saw my face, and their smiles vanished instantly. They knew who I was. In a small town like this, news travels faster than light, and scandal travels even faster. Mr. Thorne, the older nurse, said, her face flushing red. We have placed them in trauma room 3. The doctor is with them now. I didn't say a word to them. I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me angry. I just nodded and walked down the hallway. The linoleum floors squeaked under my dress shoes. Every step felt heavy. Jason was standing outside trauma room 3. He was still in his uniform, but he looked like he had been through a war. His shirt was stained with grease and sweat. His face was pale, a stark contrast to the bright fluorescent lights overhead. When he saw me, he took a step forward and then stopped as if he didn't know whether to hug me or run away. Jason, I said calmly, tell me. He ran a hand through his messy hair. Dad, I was the lead on the call. The dispatcher said it was a medical emergency in a vehicle at the park. We thought it was a heart attack, maybe a stroke. We got there, and the BMW was parked under the willow trees. The windows were fogged up. He paused, swallowing hard. I could see the trauma in his eyes, not the trauma of gore, but the trauma of seeing something that simply should not be seen. I knocked on the glass, Jason continued. And then I heard the screaming. It wasn't pain at first, Dad. It was panic. Pure animal panic. I tried to open the door, but it was locked. I had to break the window. And when I looked inside, he looked down at his boots. It was Mom, he whispered. And that guy, the neighbor, Brad. They were in the back seat. Dad. They were tangled up. I told them to calm down, to separate and get dressed so we could assess the situation. That is when Mom looked at me. She recognized me, Dad. She looked right at me and screamed that they couldn't move. I leaned against the cold hospital wall, crossing my arms. Go on, I said. Jason took a deep breath. We tried to pull them apart. We really did. We used saline. We used lubricant. We tried everything in the kit, but they were fused. It was like their skin had melted together. The more they struggled, the more it hurt them. Mom was crying, saying it felt like fire. Brad was cursing and threatening to sue the fire department if we didn't get him out instantly. Jason looked up at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. Dad, we couldn't get them out of the car door. The angle was impossible because they were connected. I had to make the call. I had to call the fire truck for the hydraulic rescue tools. The jaws of life. I stayed silent, letting the image sink in. My wife, the deaconess. My neighbor, the real estate mogul. Cut out of a luxury car like scrap metal. We had to cut the roof off the BMW, Jason said, his voice trembling. We had to cut the entire roof off to lift them out onto the stretchers. We couldn't even put them on separate gurneys. We had to lash 2 gurneys together and slide them out as one unit. The neighbors were watching. People were filming with their phones. I tried to cover their faces with sheets, but Mom kept thrashing. He grabbed my arm, his grip tight. Dad, what happened? People don't just get stuck like that. I have been an EMT for a decade. I have heard of medical conditions, muscle spasms, things like that, but this wasn't a muscle spasm. I saw the tube on the floorboard. It looked like lube, but it smelled like construction. I looked at my son-in-law. He was a smart kid. He knew. I gently removed his hand from my arm. Jason, you did your job. You saved them. That is all that matters right now. Before he could ask more, the door to the trauma room opened. Dr. Evans stepped out. I have known Dr. Evans for 20 years. We play golf sometimes. He is a man who has seen everything, a man of science and composure. But right now he looked disturbed. He took off his surgical mask and I saw a bead of sweat running down his temple. Elijah, he said, nodding to me. How are they, Doc? I asked. Physically, they are stable. Dr. Evans said, his voice low. Vitals are elevated due to stress, but hearts are fine. The problem, Elijah, is the adhesion. He glanced at Jason and then back to me. I sent a sample of the substance to the lab, but I don't need a chemist to tell me what this is. This is an industrial-grade cyanoacrylate-based bonding agent. High tensile strength, rapid curing, heat generating. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Elijah, the tissue damage is significant. The adhesive has reacted with the proteins in the skin and the mucous membranes. It has essentially welded them together at the point of contact. We cannot simply pull them apart. If we do, we will tear severe amounts of soft tissue. It would be catastrophic. I felt a cold hardness settle in my chest. So what are you saying, Doc? I am saying. We have to operate, Dr. Evans said. We have to go into the operating room and surgically excise the skin that has been bonded. We have to cut them apart. He looked me dead in the eye, and for a moment it wasn't a doctor speaking to a patient's husband. It was one man speaking to another. It is going to be a difficult surgery, Elijah, and I have to be honest with you, the scarring will be permanent, extensive, and given the location of the injury, let's just say that neither of them will ever be the same again. Functionality will be compromised. Jason gasped beside me. Oh my God, he whispered. Dr. Evans sighed. We are prepping the OR now. Elijah, I need your consent for the anesthesia. Technically, she is still your wife. I looked through the small window of the trauma room door. I could see them. They were covered in blue hospital drapes, but I could see Vivian's face. She was pale, her makeup streaked with tears, her eyes darting around the room in terror. Brad was arguing with a nurse, his face red with rage, still trying to blame everyone but himself. They looked pathetic. They looked small. I turned back to the doctor. "Do what you have to do, Doc. Save their lives. Cut them loose." As Dr. Evans turned to leave, I added one more thing. "And Doc, make sure you keep that sample from the lab. I have a feeling I am going to need it for the lawyers." Dr. Evans nodded slowly. "I'll keep it safe, Elijah." I walked over to the row of plastic chairs in the waiting area and sat down. Jason sat next to me, burying his face in his hands. "How do I tell Maya?" he mumbled. "How do I tell your daughter that her mother is in surgery because she was glued to the neighbor?" "You don't," I said, staring at the blank television screen mounted on the wall. "You don't tell her the details, Jason. You tell her there was an accident. You tell her that her mother is in the hospital. And you let me handle the rest." I leaned back and closed my eyes. I could hear the wheels of the gurney rattling down the hall as they took them to surgery. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel sad. I felt a strange, cold sense of balance. Vivian had spent 40 years taking things from me. My dignity, my confidence, my trust. Today she was losing something she could never get back. The surgery would separate their bodies, but nothing on this earth could separate them from the shame they were about to face. The real pain hadn't even started yet. The anesthesia would wear off in a few hours. But the consequences, those were going to last a lifetime. The recovery room smelled of iodine and stale air conditioning. It was a cold, sterile smell that stuck to the back of your throat. I sat in a hard plastic chair between two beds separated by a thin, patterned curtain. On one side lay my wife Vivian. On the other lay Brad, the man who had been sharing her affections and until recently sharing her skin. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitors was the only sound in the room for a long time. Beep, beep, beep. It was hypnotic. It reminded me of a countdown. I wasn't looking at them. I was looking at my hands. These hands had built foundations, framed houses, and smoothed concrete. They were rough, scarred hands. They were the hands of a maker. But as I sat there, I realized they were also the hands of a destroyer. And for the first time in 40 years, I didn't feel the urge to wash them. I felt clean. A groan came from the bed to my left. It started as a low whimper and escalated into a gasp of sudden, sharp awareness. Vivian was waking up. I watched as her eyelids fluttered. She tried to shift her weight, but the movement sent a jolt of pain through her lower body. She let out a sharp cry and grabbed the bed rails. Her eyes snapped open, wild and unfocused, darting around the room until they landed on me. For a second, I saw confusion. Then I saw memory flood back. The car, the heat, the screaming, the firefighters. And finally, I saw the realization of who was sitting in the chair watching her. I expected shame. I expected her to pull the sheet up over her head. I expected tears of apology. But I had forgotten who I was dealing with. Vivian didn't do shame. She did offense. "You," she shrieked, her voice raspy from the anesthesia tube. "You did this." She tried to sit up, but the pain forced her back down. Her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. "You crazy old man. You tried to kill me. Look at me, Elijah. Look at what you did." I didn't move. I just crossed my legs and rested my hands on my knee. "I didn't try to kill you, Vivian," I said calmly. "I just fixed a loose seal." From behind the curtain, a male voice groaned. It was Brad. He sounded like he had been gargling with gravel. "Is that him? Is that the lunatic?" Brad yelled. His voice was thick with painkillers, but sharp with rage. "Hey, you hear me, old man? I'm going to have your head on a platter." Vivian latched onto his anger like a lifeline. She pointed a trembling finger at me. "You tampered with my car. That is attempted murder. That is assault. I am going to call the police. I am going to tell them everything. You are sick, Elijah. You are a sick, twisted man. How could you do this to the mother of your child? How could you do this to a grandmother?" I listened to her. I really listened. It was fascinating in a morbid way. This is what they call gaslighting. She was the one who cheated. She was the one who brought a strange man into the car I paid for. She was the one who broke our vows. But in her mind, I was the villain because I made her face the consequences. She was trying to rewrite reality in real time. And you, Brad shouted again, the curtain rustling as he tried to move, "You ruined me." The doctor said, "He said I might have permanent nerve damage. Do you know what that means? I am a man in my prime. You took that away from me. I'm going to sue you for everything you have, Brad continued, his voice rising in pitch. I know who you are. Elijah Thorne. I know you have assets. I'm going to take your house. I'm going to take your savings. I'm going to take every single penny you have to pay for the reconstruction of my body. Vivian nodded aggressively, wincing as she did. That is right. We will sue you until you are living in a cardboard box. You think you are smart? You are just a bitter, impotent old fool who couldn't keep his wife happy, so you had to punish her. The accusation hung in the air. Impotent. Useless. That was the narrative she had built. That was the excuse she used to justify her betrayal. I reached into the inner pocket of my suit jacket. I moved slowly, deliberately. They both went silent, watching me. Maybe they thought I was pulling out a gun. In a way I was, but it was a much more dangerous weapon than a pistol. I pulled out my smartphone. You know, Vivian, I said, my voice steady and low, I have always worried about your driving. You have a heavy foot and you don't check your blind spots. Remember last month when you backed into the mailbox? She glared at me. What does that have to do with anything? I was worried about your safety, I continued. So 3 weeks ago, I installed a dash cam in the Escalade, a very expensive one. It records front and rear video, but it also records high-definition audio inside the cabin. It has a motion sensor. It starts recording the moment there is movement in the car. Vivian's face went from red to a ghostly shade of gray. The silence in the room suddenly became very heavy. I tapped the screen of my phone. I connected it to the cloud this morning while I was waiting for you to get out of surgery. Would you like to hear the playlist? I didn't wait for an answer. I pressed play. The volume was turned all the way up. The sound of car doors opening filled the hospital room. Then the sound of fabric rustling. And then Vivian's voice. Clear as a bell. He is such a bore, Brad. He just sits in that garage all day. He smells like sawdust and old age. Then Brad's voice. Arrogant and smooth. Don't worry, babe. Once we convince him to sell that lake house, we can use the money for that trip to Cabo. He doesn't even know what he has. We will bleed him dry, and he will thank us for it. Then came the sounds of intimacy. Wet, sloppy sounds that made my stomach turn. But I didn't stop the recording. I let it play. I let the sounds of their betrayal fill the space between us. Vivian's voice came again on the recording. He is pathetic, really. He thinks I am at a charity meeting. He is so gullible. I can wrap him around my little finger. I paused the recording. The room was deadly silent. The only sound was the beeping of the monitor, which had sped up significantly. Vivian's heart rate was climbing. I looked at her. She wasn't shouting anymore. She was staring at the phone in my hand as if it were a venomous snake. That is illegal, Brad stammered from behind the curtain, but his voice had lost its fire. You can't record people without their consent. It is inadmissible in court. Actually, Brad, I said, standing up and buttoning my jacket. In the state of Georgia, a dash cam in a private vehicle owned by the recording party is perfectly legal property surveillance. And even if it wasn't, I am not talking about a court of law. Not yet. I took a step closer to Vivian's bed. She shrank back into the pillows. You want to sue me? I asked. You want to drag me through the mud? Go ahead. Call your lawyers. File your motions. Accuse me of whatever you want. I held the phone up. But here is the deal. The moment I receive a single legal notice from either of you, this video and the video of the two of you being cut out of the car by the fire department goes onto the internet. I will send it to every news station in Atlanta. I will post it on every social media platform. I will send it to your boss, Brad. I will send it to the church board, Vivian. I leaned in close, so close I could see the fear in her eyes. You mentioned dignity earlier. You think you lost your dignity today? No. Today was just a warm-up. If you push me, Vivian, I will make sure that every time you walk into a grocery store, every time you go to a restaurant, people won't see a victim. They will see the woman who was glued to her neighbor while plotting to steal her husband's money. Brad was silent. Not a peep. He knew his career as a high-end real estate agent would be over the second that audio leaked. He knew he was trapped. Vivian started to cry. But these weren't fake tears. These were tears of defeat. Elijah, please, she whispered. We can talk about this. We can work this out. I looked at her one last time. I looked at the woman I had loved for 40 years, the woman I had worked my fingers to the bone for. And I felt absolutely nothing. The love hadn't just died. It had been murdered, premeditated, and cold. There is nothing to work out, Vivian, I said. I will cover the medical bills for today because I am a decent man. But when you get out of this hospital, don't come back to my house. Your bags will be on the porch. I turned and walked toward the door. And Brad. I called out without looking back. Yes, his voice trembled. I hope the reconstruction goes well. You are going to need all the strength you can get. Because if you ever step foot on my property again, I won't use glue next time. I have a lot of concrete left over from my last job. I walked out of the recovery room and let the heavy door swing shut behind me. I could hear Vivian sobbing a loud, ugly sound. It was the sound of a woman realizing that the ATM machine, the safety net, the gullible old fool, was gone forever. I walked down the hallway past the nurses' station. The nurses were still whispering, but I didn't care. I took out my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in 20 years. It rang 3 times before a gruff voice answered. Hello. Hey, Sam, I said. It's Elijah Thorne. Elijah. I haven't heard from you since the Gulf War. Everything okay? Not really. Sam, I said, walking out into the bright afternoon sunlight. I need a favor. You are still a private investigator, right? Yeah, the best in the state. Why I need you to dig into a man named Brad, or whatever his real name is. I have a feeling he is not who he says he is. And Sam, yeah, dig deep. I want to know everything. I want to know where he came from, who he owes money to, and exactly how many other women he has scammed. I am going to bury him, and I want to make sure I have the right shovel. Consider it done, Elijah. I hung up the phone. The air outside tasted sweet. It tasted like freedom. The war wasn't over. In fact, the battle for my assets was just beginning. But as I walked to my car, I smiled. They thought they were dealing with a retired old man. They forgot that before I was a contractor, I was a soldier, and a soldier never goes into battle without a strategy. The glue was just the warning shot. Now it was time to bring out the heavy artillery. The silence in the house was heavy, like the air before a tornado touches down. I sat in my leather armchair in the living room, the one with the worn armrests where I had spent thousands of evenings reading blueprints and calculating lumber costs. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked, tick-tock. It was the only sound in the world. I was waiting. I heard the car pull up outside. It wasn't Jason's truck, it was a taxi. I watched through the sheer curtains as the driver got out, opened the back door, and helped my wife out. Vivian. She didn't step out of the car with the grace she usually prided herself on. She didn't glide. She shuffled. She waddled. The bandages under her loose floral dress made her walk with her legs wide apart, wincing with every small movement. It was a walk of shame, but as she looked up at the house, I didn't see humility in her eyes. I saw fury. She refused the driver's help to the door. She limped up the walkway, clutching her purse like a weapon. I didn't get up to open the door. I let her struggle with the keys. I let her realize that the service she had expected for 40 years, the door holding the bag carrying the silent support, was over. The door swung open. She stood there, pale and sweating from the exertion. She looked at me sitting in the chair. "Don't just sit there, Elijah," she snapped, her voice cracking. "Help me to the sofa. The doctor said I shouldn't be walking this much." I didn't move. I took a sip of my iced tea. "You managed to walk to Brad's car just fine this morning, Vivian. I am sure you can make it to the sofa." She let out a sound of pure frustration, a guttural growl, and hobbled to the couch. She collapsed onto it, arranging pillows around her hips with exaggerated groans of pain. Once she was settled, she glared at me. Her eyes were puffy from crying, but dry now. Cold and dry. "I want a divorce," she said. I nodded slowly. I assumed that was coming. "And I want half," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "We have been married for 40 years, Elijah. In the eyes of the law, I am entitled to 50% of everything. The house, the pension, the savings, the life insurance policies, everything." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had never worked a day in a construction site in her life. The woman whose hands were soft because mine were hard. "You want half?" I repeated. "You cheat on me, you humiliate me in front of the entire neighborhood. And now you want to take half of what I built. It is what I am owed," she shouted, then winced as the movement pulled at her stitches. "I cooked your meals. I raised your daughter. I put up with your long hours and your obsession with work. I deserve to live comfortably for the rest of my life, and I don't want to live it with a man who glues me to things." She was right about one thing. We were done. But there was something in her tone, a desperate greed that triggered an alarm in the back of my mind, a contractor's instinct. When a client starts screaming about money before the job is even inspected, it usually means they are broke. And then I remembered. The safe. In the floor of my home office, hidden under a rug and a heavy oak desk, was a fireproof floor safe. It was my rainy day fund. For 30 years, every time I finished a big job under budget, every time I did a side project on a weekend, I put cash in there. It was for emergencies. It was for Maya's future. It was for our old age. The last time I checked, there was nearly $200,000 in there. I stood up. "Where are you going?" Vivian demanded. "I am talking to you." I ignored her. I walked down the hallway to the office. My heart started to beat faster, a heavy thudding against my ribs. I entered the office and shoved the heavy desk aside. It moved easily. Too easily. I pulled back the rug. The dial of the safe was exposed, but something was wrong. There was dust around the rim, but the dial itself was clean. Fingerprints. I knelt down. My hands trembled slightly as I spun the combination. Right to 24, left to 10, right to 5. The handle clicked. I pulled the heavy steel door open. I stared into the darkness of the metal box. I reached my hand inside, expecting to feel the stacks of $100 bills wrapped in rubber bands, the smell of old paper money, the smell of security. My hand grasped nothing but cold air. It was empty. I felt around the corners, desperate. Maybe it was pushed to the back. Maybe it was just one stack left. But there was nothing. Not a single bill. $200,000. Gone. I sat back on my heels, the room spinning slightly. That money wasn't just paper. That money was my sweat. That money was the summer of '98 when I shingled roofs in 100-degree heat until I passed out. That money was the winter of 2005 when I poured concrete in the freezing rain until my fingers turned blue. That money was the sacrifices I made, the holidays I missed, the car I didn't buy so she could have hers. I stood up. A cold calm washed over me. This wasn't just a divorce anymore. This wasn't just a civil dispute. This was theft. I walked back into the living room. Vivian was checking her phone, probably texting him. She looked up when I entered, and for the first time she looked nervous. She saw the look on my face. It wasn't the look of a husband. It was the look of an executioner. "Where is it?" I asked. My voice was barely a whisper, but it carried across the room like a gunshot. "Where is—" What she feigned ignorance, looking down at her nails. "The money, Vivian. The cash in the floor safe. $200,000. "Where is it?" She swallowed hard. She tried to maintain her defiant posture, but her chin quivered. I invested it," she said. "You invested it," I repeated, "without asking me, without telling me. You took the key from my keychain while I was sleeping and you stole our retirement fund." "It is not stealing if it belongs to me too," she shrieked. "And it is a good investment. It is going to double in 6 months." I took a step closer to her. "Invested in what?" "Vivian real estate," she yelled. "Prime development land in Florida." "It is a sure thing." I felt the blood drain from my face. Florida. Land deals. Who was the broker? I asked, though I already knew the answer. I felt sick to my stomach. Who handled the deal? Vivian. She lifted her chin defiantly. Brad did. He is a developer. Elijah, a real one, not a glorious handyman like you. He knows the market. He said if I gave him the cash now, we could flip the property by Christmas and make a fortune. He is doing us a favor. I started to laugh. It was a dry, humorless sound that hurt my throat. You gave him the money, I said. You gave the man you are sleeping with $200,000 of my money. Cash. He gave me a receipt, she insisted, reaching for her purse. He drew up a contract. It is all legal. She pulled out a piece of paper and waved it at me. I snatched it from her hand. I looked at it. It was a joke. It was a generic promissory note downloaded from the internet. No letterhead, no company seal. Just Brad's scrawled signature and a vague reference to a parcel of land in a county that I knew for a fact was mostly swampland. You fool, I whispered. You absolute fool. Don't you call me that, she screamed. You are just jealous because he has vision and you don't. He is going to make us rich. I looked at her, and the pity I felt was overwhelmed by disgust. He didn't invest that money, Vivian, I said, crumpling the paper in my fist. He spent it, or he hid it. Why do you think he moved into this neighborhood? Why do you think he targeted you? He didn't want you for your beauty. He didn't want you for your personality. He wanted you because you were the weak link to my bank account." She shook her head violently, covering her ears. "Stop it. You are lying. He loves me. He loves your cash," I roared, throwing the crumpled paper at her. "And now it is gone. You realize that? You just handed our entire safety net to a con artist." "He is not a con artist," she sobbed. "He is a businessman. And when he gets out of the hospital, he will prove you wrong." I stared at her. She truly believed it. She was so deep in the lie that she couldn't see the light of day. She had bankrupted us. She had betrayed me in the bed, and she had betrayed me in the bank. I walked over to the fireplace and picked up the phone. "Who are you calling?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I am calling the police," I said. "I am reporting a theft." "You can't," she gasped. "I am your wife. You can't arrest your wife for spending family money." "Watch me," I said. But I didn't dial 911. Not yet. I dialed Jason. "Jason," I said when he picked up, "I need you to come over here and bring a camera." "Why, Dad? What is going on? Is Mom okay?" "Mom is fine," I said, staring at Vivian, who was now weeping into the sofa cushions. "But we have a new problem. This isn't just a divorce anymore, son. This is a crime scene." I hung up. I looked at Vivian one last time. "You wanted half," I said coldly. "Well, congratulations. You just spent your half, and now you are going to help me get my half back from your boyfriend. Or I swear to God, Vivian, the glue will be the least painful thing that happens to you this year." She looked up at me, terror finally dawning in her eyes. She realized that the money was the only leverage she had, and she had given it away. I turned and walked out of the room. I needed air. I needed to think. 200 grand. Gone. My hands curled into fists. Brad wasn't just a neighbor who slept with my wife. He was a predator who had come into my cave and stolen my kill. I walked to the garage. I looked at the shelf of tools. I looked at the sledgehammers. I looked at the pry bars. "I am going to get that money back," I whispered to the empty garage, "even if I have to take it out of his hide $1 at a time." This was no longer a heartbreak. This was a financial war, and I had been building fortresses my whole life. It was time to show them what happens when you try to breach the walls of Elijah Thorne. The front door flew open with force enough to rattle the frame. I didn't have to look up from my coffee to know who it was. It was Maya, my daughter, my pride and joy. The girl whose tuition I had paid for by working double shifts until my back felt like it was made of broken glass. She walked in her heels, clicking sharply against the hardwood floors I had laid with my own hands 20 years ago. But she didn't come to me. She didn't look at me with the eyes of a daughter greeting her father. She looked at me like I was a stranger, a dangerous stranger. "Daddy, what have you done?" she gasped, dropping her designer handbag on the floor. She rushed past me straight to the sofa where Vivian was lying. Vivian had set the stage perfectly. She was propped up on 3 pillows, a dramatic ice pack on her hip, her face twisted into a mask of tragic suffering. As soon as she saw Maya, the waterworks started. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar. "Oh, baby," Vivian sobbed, reaching out her manicured hands. "He is crazy. Your father has lost his mind. I am in so much pain." Maya knelt beside her mother, her face pale. She looked at the bandages peeking out from under Vivian's robe. She looked at the bruises on her mother's arms, bruises from the struggle with the firefighters, not from me. But context didn't matter to Maya right now. All she saw was her mother broken and weeping. I stood up slowly. "Hello, Maya," I said. My voice was calm, but inside my heart was breaking. I wanted to hug her. I wanted to tell her that I was the victim here. But I knew that look in her eyes. It was the look of a prosecutor. Maya stood up and turned to face me. She is 30 years old, a corporate attorney in Atlanta. She knows how to argue. She knows how to intimidate. And right now, she was aiming all that expensive education right at me. "Is it true?" she demanded. "Did you put industrial adhesive in her car? Did you glue her to that man?" I didn't flinch. "I did," I said simply. "How could you?" She screamed. Her voice cracked, losing its professional polish. "You could have killed her. This is assault. Dad, this is battery. Do you realize you could go to jail? Do you realize you have humiliated us?" My phone hasn't stopped ringing for 3 hours. Everyone knows. My partners at the firm know. "She cheated on me, Maya," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "She brought a man into the car I paid for. She disrespected our marriage in the most vile way possible. So you maim her. Maya shouted back, tears streaming down her face. You don't glue people together. Dad, you get a divorce. You act like a civilized human being. You don't act like some vindictive monster. I felt a sharp pain in my chest. Monster, is that what I was? For 40 years I was the provider. I was the rock. When Maya wanted a pony, I built her a stable. When she wanted to go to that fancy summer camp, I sold my favorite truck. And now because I refused to be a doormat, I was a monster. You don't know the half of it, I said, pointing a trembling finger at Vivian. It wasn't just the cheating Maya. Ask your mother about the safe. Ask her about the retirement money. Maya frowned, confused. What are you talking about? $200,000, I said, my voice rising. She stole $200,000 from the floor safe, my life savings, your inheritance. She gave it to that man, to Brad. Maya turned to Vivian. Mom, is that true? Vivian wailed louder, clutching her chest. He is lying. He is trying to justify what he did. I invested it. I was trying to help the family. He is twisting everything because he is jealous and old and bitter. Maya looked back at me, shaking her head. Even if she did take the money. Dad, money is just paper. You physically hurt her. You have scarred her for life. Do you see the difference? You escalated this to violence. I stared at my daughter. I realized then that she didn't see me. She didn't see the man who taught her to ride a bike. She saw a black man with a history of working with his hands, and she saw violence. She had bought into the narrative that her mother was a fragile flower, and I was the brute. You are treating me like the criminal, I whispered. But I am the one who was robbed. I am the one who was betrayed. You are the one who planned it. Dad, Maya yelled. That is malice aforethought. That is psychopathic. I sank back into my chair. I felt old. Older than I had ever felt. I had lost my wife, my money, and now it seemed my daughter. Suddenly a voice cut through the shouting. It was quiet, but it was firm. Stop it, Maya. We all turned. It was Jason, my son-in-law. He was standing in the doorway of the kitchen holding a glass of water he had been getting for Vivian. Jason, the white boy from the suburbs, who I always thought was too soft for my daughter. Jason, who liked video games and craft beer and never got grease under his fingernails. Jason, stay out of this, Maya snapped. This is family business. It became my business when I had to cut the roof off a BMW this morning, Jason said. He walked into the living room and slammed the glass of water down on the coffee table. Water splashed onto the wood, but he didn't care. He looked at his wife. You are wrong, Maya. Maya looked stunned. Excuse me. You are wrong, Jason repeated. He pointed at me. Your dad didn't start this, and he isn't the villain here. Jason, look at her. Maya gestured to Vivian. She is in stitches. I saw them, Maya, Jason said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. I was the first responder. I was the one who had to look through that window, and let me tell you something you don't know. He took a step closer to Maya. When I got to that car before they realized they were stuck, they were laughing. The room went dead silent. Vivian stopped crying instantly. Her eyes darted to Jason. They were laughing, Jason said, looking disgusted. I could hear them through the glass before I broke it. They were making fun of the car. They were making fun of Elijah. I heard that guy Brad say something about spending the old man's money. Jason turned to Vivian. You weren't a victim in that car, Vivian. You were celebrating. You were gloating. You were high on the thrill of screwing over the man who paid for the leather seats you were sitting on. Maya stared at her husband. You heard that? I heard it, Jason said. And I saw the look on your dad's face when he walked into the ER. He wasn't angry, Maya. He looked dead inside. A man doesn't do what he did because he is crazy. He does it because he has been pushed past the point of no return. Jason turned back to Maya, his eyes pleading. You keep talking about the glue, but you are ignoring the poison. Your mother has been poisoning this family for years. The way she talks to him, the way she spends his money, the way she treats him like a servant. The glue. The glue was just the reaction. The poison was already there. Maya looked at me. For a second I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. She looked at Vivian, who was now glaring at Jason with pure venom. But then the conditioning kicked back in. The years of Vivian whispering in her ear. The instinct to protect the mother. That doesn't justify torture, Jason, Maya said coldly. She stepped away from him. And I can't believe you are defending him. I am defending the truth, Jason said. Maya shook her head. She grabbed her purse off the floor. I can't be here. I can't listen to this. This house, it is toxic. She looked at me one last time. Her eyes were hard again. You need help, Dad. Professional help. I am going to stay at a hotel, and I am taking Mom with me as soon as she is stable enough to move. Do not contact me until you are ready to apologize. She turned to Jason. Are you coming, or are you staying with him? Jason looked at me, then he looked at Maya. I'll drive you to the hotel, he said quietly, because you are my wife. But I am coming back here to help Elijah secure the house, because he is my family too. Maya scoffed. A sound of pure disbelief. She spun on her heel and marched out the door. Jason gave me a nod of solidarity, a nod of respect that I had never seen from him before, and followed her. The door slammed shut. I was left alone in the living room with Vivian. But the dynamic had changed. She wasn't wailing anymore. She was staring at the door where Jason had just exited, realizing that her perfect image had just developed a crack. I stood up and walked over to her. She flinched, pulling the robe tighter around her. Get out, I said. What? She whispered. You heard me. Get out. Call a cab. Call Maya. I don't care, but get out of my house. Elijah, I am injured. I don't care, I said. My voice was flat. Dead. You have 5 minutes before I start throwing your clothes onto the lawn. And it is raining, Vivian. Those designer dresses won't hold up well in the mud. I turned my back on her and walked to the kitchen. I needed a drink, not alcohol. I needed water. I needed to wash the taste of betrayal out of my mouth. As I stood at the sink looking out at the dark backyard, I heard the front door open and close again. She was gone. She had hobbled out to wait on the porch rather than stay in the room with me. I was alone. The house was big. It was empty. It was quiet. But for the first time in 40 years, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt like potential. I had lost my daughter for now. I had lost my wife forever. I had lost my savings. But as I leaned against the granite counter I had installed myself, I realized I still had the one thing they couldn't take. I had the truth. And I had a son-in-law who finally had a backbone. I took a sip of water. The war wasn't over. Maya would be back with lawyers. Vivian would be back for the furniture. But I was ready. I was Elijah Thorne, and I was done building castles for people who only wanted to watch them burn. The knock on the door came at 9 in the morning on a Thursday. It wasn't a friendly knock. It was a sharp, authoritative rap that demanded attention. I was sitting at my kitchen island drinking coffee out of a chipped mug that my daughter Maya had made for me in pottery class 20 years ago. The house was quiet. Too quiet. For decades, this house had been filled with the sounds of Vivian's television shows, her phone calls, the clatter of her heels. Now the silence felt heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. I opened the door. A young man stood there chewing gum, holding a thick manila envelope. He looked bored. To him, I was just another name on a list. To him, this was just a job. Elijah Thorne, he asked, looking at a clipboard. That is me, I said. You have been served, he mumbled, shoving the envelope into my chest. Have a nice day. He turned and walked away before I could even grip the paper. I watched him get into a beat-up sedan and drive off. I looked down at the envelope. It was heavy. It felt like holding a brick. I knew what was inside, but knowing didn't make the weight any lighter. I walked back into the kitchen, put on my reading glasses, and tore open the seal. I sat down. I took a deep breath. And I began to read the destruction of my life. There were 2 separate documents. The first was from the Superior Court of Fulton County. Plaintiff Bradley Brad Miller, defendant Elijah Thorne. I skimmed the legal jargon, the whereas and the wherefores until I got to the numbers. My eyes widened. I actually laughed out loud. A dry, humorless bark of a laugh. $5 million. Brad was suing me for $5 million. The list of charges was longer than my grocery list. Intentional infliction of emotional distress, battery, assault with a deadly weapon, permanent bodily disfigurement, loss of consortium, loss of income, and my personal favorite punitive damages for malicious intent. $5 million. The man who had slept with my wife, the man who had defiled my car, the man who had stolen my retirement fund, now wanted $5 million because I had inconvenienced him with a tube of glue. He claimed that the injury had rendered him unable to work as a real estate developer. He claimed the psychological trauma caused him night terrors. He He claimed that the scarring on his private parts had ruined his quality of life. I tossed that pile of garbage aside and picked up the second document. This one hurt more. This one was from Vivian. Petition for dissolution of marriage. I expected the divorce. I wanted the divorce. But then I read the demands. Vivian wasn't just asking to leave. She was asking to burn the house down on her way out. She was demanding 70% of all marital assets. 70%. She cited my abusive behavior and her emotional fragility as reasons why she deserved the majority share. She wanted the house. She wanted my truck. She wanted 70% of my pension. And the cherry on top, she was requesting lifetime alimony of $4,000 a month to maintain the standard of living she had become accustomed to. I stared at the paper. The standard of living she was accustomed to was paid for by my sweat. It was paid for by my broken back. And now she wanted me to pay her to live that life with another man. I looked at the bottom of the page to see who was representing them. When I saw the name of the law firm, my blood ran cold. Sterling Vance and Associates. I knew that name. Everyone in Atlanta knew that name. Leonard Sterling was a billboard lawyer. His face was plastered on buses and park benches. He called himself the Shark. He didn't take cases to find justice. He took cases to destroy defendants. He was known for dragging proceedings out for years, bleeding the opposition dry in legal fees until they settled just to make the pain stop. He was expensive. Very expensive. And that is when the realization hit me like a sledgehammer. They were paying Sterling with my money. The $200,000 Vivian had stolen from the floor safe. She hadn't invested it in land. She had invested it in a war chest. She had handed my life savings to a shark so he could eat me alive. I stood up and paced the kitchen. The audacity of it was breathtaking. They were using my own money to sue me for the rest of my money. It was a perfect circle of greed. I could feel the anger rising in my chest, hot and suffocating. I wanted to drive over to the hotel where they were staying and break down the door. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break something. But I didn't. I am Elijah Thorne. I don't break things out of anger. I fix things. And when something is too rotten to fix, I demolish it. I needed a demolition crew. I walked to my garage office. I didn't call a lawyer. Not yet. A lawyer would tell me to settle. A lawyer would tell me to mitigate the damage. I didn't want mitigation. I wanted total victory. I pulled out an old address book from my desk drawer. It was battered, held together with a rubber band. I flipped through the pages until I found the letter S. Sam the Ghost Reynolds. Sam and I served in the Army together back in the 70s. We were just kids then, stationed in Germany, freezing our tails off, guarding a border that didn't exist anymore. After the service, I went into construction. Sam went into intelligence and then private security and finally private investigation. He wasn't the kind of PI who took pictures of cheating spouses. He was the kind of PI you called when you needed to know where the bodies were buried. I dialed the number. It rang 4 times. "Yeah," a gravelly voice answered. "Sam, it's Elijah." There was a pause, then a low chuckle. Elijah Thorne, the man who can build a house in a week but takes 10 years to make a phone call. "I heard you made the news, brother. Something about a sticky situation." "News travels fast," I said. "Bad news travels instantly," Sam replied. "I saw the footage on Twitter. Your wife and the neighbor. Hell of a way to retire Elijah. It is about to get worse, Sam. They just served me $5 million, and she wants 70% of everything I own. They hired Leonard Sterling." Sam whistled. "Sterling. That is playing in the big leagues. That man doesn't have a soul. He has a billing departmentee where his heart should be." "I know," I said. "That is why I am calling you. I need ammo, Sam." "What kind of ammo?" "I need you to dig into the boyfriend. Brad Miller, or whatever his name is." "You think he is a fake?" "I know he is a fake," I said, leaning back in my chair. "He claims he is a big-time developer, but he has soft hands, Sam. He doesn't know the difference between plywood and drywall, and he convinced my wife to hand over 200 grand in cash for a land deal that doesn't exist." 200 grand? Sam asked, his voice losing its humor. "Cash," I confirmed. "My retirement." "Elijah, if he took that money across state lines, that is federal wire fraud. That is FBI territory." "I don't want the FBI yet," I said. "I want you. I want you to tear his life apart. I want to know where he was born. I want to know who he really is. I want to know about his ex-wives, his credit score, his criminal record. I want to know what he eats for breakfast. It will cost you, Elijah." Sterling is expensive, but good intel isn't cheap either. I don't care, I said. I have some bonds I can cash out. I will pay whatever it takes. I am not going to let him win, Sam. I built this life brick by brick. I will be damned if I let a grifter with a tube of glue and a cheap suit take it apart. Meet me at the Waffle House on Piedmont in an hour, Sam said. Bring cash. And bring a picture of him. I hung up the phone. I went upstairs to my bedroom, the bedroom I used to share with Vivian. Her side of the bed was made perfectly, the pillows arranged just so. It looked like a shrine to a woman who had died. In a way, she had. The Vivian I loved was gone. The woman who occupied her body now was a stranger. I went to the closet and pulled out a shoebox of old photos. I found one from a neighborhood block party a month ago. Vivian was smiling, holding a glass of wine. Brad was standing next to her, his hand hovering just above her waist. At the time, I thought it was friendly. Now, looking at it, I saw the possession. I saw the smirk. I took a pair of scissors and cut Vivian out of the picture. I let her piece drift to the floor. I held the picture of Brad. "You want $5 million, I whispered to the photo. "You want my house?" I put the photo in my pocket and grabbed my keys. I drove to the Waffle House. Sam was already there, sitting in a back booth. He looked the same as always. Bald head, thick gray beard eyes that moved constantly, scanning the room. He was wearing a faded army jacket. I slid into the booth opposite him. I didn't say hello. I slid the envelope with the photo across the greasy table. "That is him," I said. Sam picked up the photo. He studied it for a long time. He took out a small magnifying glass from his pocket and looked closer. "You know, Elijah?" Sam said slowly. "I have seen this face before." Where Sam tapped the photo. About 5 years ago. I was working a case in Alabama. A wealthy widow got taken for a ride by a charming oil investor. Lost her house, lost her savings. Guy vanished into thin air. He had a mustache then, and darker hair. But the eyes, you can't change the eyes. My heart skipped a beat. "You think it is the same guy? I don't think, Elijah. In my line of work, thinking gets you killed. Knowing gets you paid." Sam put the photo in his jacket pocket. "Give me 48 hours. If this is who I think it is, you won't need a lawyer to fight that lawsuit. You will need a mop to clean up the mess when he explodes." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a thick envelope of cash, $5,000 I had pulled from an emergency line of credit. "Get him, Sam." Sam took the money and nodded. "Go home, Elijah. Lock your doors. Don't answer the phone. Let them think you are scared. Let them think you are hiding. When they get confident, they get sloppy." I drove home feeling a strange sense of calm. The subpoena was still sitting on my kitchen counter demanding $5 million, but it didn't look like a death sentence anymore. It looked like a trap, and they had walked right into it. Vivian thought she was marrying a rich developer. She thought she was upgrading. She had no idea she had just tied herself literally and legally to a ghost. And ghosts have a way of haunting the people who believe in them. I poured myself another cup of coffee. I sat in the dark living room and watched the rain fall against the window. Let them sue. Let them scheme. The storm was coming, but this time I wasn't going to be the one getting wet. 48 hours later, I was sitting in the passenger seat of Sam's beat-up surveillance van. It was parked in the darkest corner of a Walmart parking lot, the kind of place where people mind their own business. The rain was drumming a steady rhythm on the metal roof, sounding like gravel being poured onto a tin sheet. It was fitting weather for what I was about to learn. Sam Reynolds didn't look at me. He was busy adjusting the focus on a long-range camera lens, even though there was nothing to photograph. It was a nervous tic he had developed in the service. He reached into the back seat and pulled out a thick manila folder. It was thicker than the one I had given him. He dropped it onto my lap. It landed with a heavy thud, the sound of a judge's gavel sealing a verdict. "You better put your glasses on, Elijah," Sam said, his voice low and gravelly. "And you better brace yourself. What is in there isn't pretty." I put on my reading glasses and opened the folder. The first thing I saw was a mugshot. It was grainy black and white and clearly old. But the eyes were the same. The arrogant, predatory tilt of the chin was the same. The man in the photo had a mustache and darker hair, but it was him. It was Brad. "His name isn't Brad Miller," Sam said, tearing open a packet of chewing gum. "His name is Chadwick Vance. He was born in Biloxi, Mississippi 46 years ago. And Elijah, he didn't make his money in real estate. I flipped the page. There was a list, a long list of names. Beatrice Washington, Clara Jones, Eleanor Davis. They were all women. I looked at the photos attached to their files. They all looked similar. They were all African-American women in their 60s and 70s. They were all well-dressed, church-going, respectable women. Women who had worked hard their whole lives. Women like Vivian. He has a type 1, whispered, a wave of nausea rolling in my stomach. He is a hunter, Elijah, Sam corrected. He targets widows and divorcees in the South. Women who have assets but feel lonely. Women who are afraid of growing old alone. He swoops in, plays the role of the successful younger admirer. He goes to their churches. He attends their charity galas. He makes them feel desirable again. I stared at the photo of a woman named Clara from Jackson, Mississippi. The note next to her name said, "Deceased. Stroke." He bled her dry, Sam said, tapping the photo. He convinced her to liquidate her pension to invest in a luxury condo development in Gulf Shores. The condos didn't exist. The company was a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. By the time her children found out the money was gone and Chadwick was in the wind, Clara died of a stroke 2 months later. The stress killed her. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. This wasn't just a con. This was murder by other means. And Vivian, I asked, my voice trembling. She is just the latest mark, Sam said. He moved to this neighborhood 6 months ago because he researched the demographics. He knew there were retired couples here with paid-off mortgages. He picked Vivian because she was loud about her status. She wears her insecurity on her sleeve, Elijah. He saw a woman who wanted to be more than she was, and he sold her a mirror that showed her what she wanted to see. I closed the file. My hands were shaking. $200,000. That money wasn't invested in land. It was probably already sitting in an offshore account funding his next BMW lease or his legal defense. Can we arrest him? I asked. We have this. We know who he is. Sam shook his head slowly. That is the problem. Being a jerk isn't illegal. Changing your name isn't illegal if you file the paperwork, which he did. And the money, Vivian gave it to him willingly. I dug into the transaction records. She signed a gift letter, Elijah. To avoid taxes on the transfer, she signed a document stating that the $200,000 was a personal gift to a friend. There is no contract. There is no investment paperwork. In the eyes of the law, she just gave her boyfriend a very expensive present. I slammed my fist against the dashboard. The plastic rattled. So he gets away with it, I shouted. He steals my life savings, destroys my marriage, humiliates me, and he just walks away. Because my wife was stupid enough to sign a gift letter. He gets away with it, if we play by the rules, Sam said. He looked at me, his dark eyes serious. The police can't touch him right now. He has covered his tracks. He has a top-tier lawyer paid for by your money. If you go to court with this file, his lawyer will argue that Chadwick has turned over a new leaf, that the past is the past, and that Vivian is a grown woman who made a choice. You will lose Elijah, and you will lose the rest of your money paying legal fees. I sat back, feeling the weight of defeat pressing down on my chest. The law was a shield for the wicked. So what do? I asked. Do I just let him win? Do I let him take half my house too? Sam smiled. It was a cold, wolfish smile. No, you don't let him win. You change the game. What do you mean Chadwick is a predator? Sam said. And predators have a weakness. They are always hungry. He didn't steal 200 grand to retire Elijah. He stole it to feed a lifestyle. He needs more. He always needs more. He is suing you for $5 million because he thinks you are an easy target. He thinks you are just a broken old man. He doesn't know. You know who he is. Sam reached into the back seat and pulled out another file. This one was thin. I found something else, Sam said. Chadwick has a gambling problem, a big one. He owes money to some very bad people in New Orleans. That is why he is pushing so hard for the settlement. He needs cash fast. I looked at Sam. A plan began to form in the back of my mind. A plan that relied on the one thing I knew Chadwick couldn't resist. Greed. He needs money, I whispered. He is desperate for it, Sam confirmed. I thought about the assets I had left. The house in Atlanta was tied up in the divorce. The savings were gone, but there was one thing left. One thing that looked like a gold mine on paper but was actually a sinkhole in reality, the Florida property. Years ago, before the market crashed, I had bought a vacation home in the Florida Panhandle. It was supposed to be a fixer-upper. It turned out to be a disaster. The foundation was sinking. The land was designated as protected wetlands, meaning we couldn't develop it. And worse, there was a lien on it from the EPA for environmental code violations. It was worthless. Actually, it was worse than worthless. It was a liability worth -$. I had been trying to offload it for 5 years, but nobody would touch it. But on Zillow, it still looked like a beachfront paradise valued at $700,000 because the county hadn't updated the assessment in a decade. "Sam," I said, turning to look at my friend, "does Chadwick know about my Florida property?" Sam shrugged. "He probably knows you own it. Public records. But he doesn't know the details. He just sees an address near the beach." I smiled. It was the first time I had genuinely smiled in days. "He wants assets," I said. "He wants a settlement. Vivian wants to look rich. I am going to give them what they want." I continued. "I am going to offer to settle. I am going to tell them that I don't have the $5 million in cash, but I have a property in Florida that is worth nearly $1 million. I will tell them I am tired of fighting. I will tell them I just want to move on." Sam started to chuckle. "You are going to bait the trap. I am going to hand him the deed," I said. "I am going to transfer the title to him and Vivian. And once they sign that transfer, they assume the liabilities. They assume the EPA fines. They assume the sinking foundation. And since he owes money to sharks in New Orleans when he tries to flip that house and realizes it is unsellable, the sharks will come for him." Sam finished. "Exactly," I said. "I can't put him in jail, Sam, but I can put him in a hole so deep he will never climb out." Sam handed me the folder with Chadwick's real history. "Keep this," he said. "Don't show it to anyone yet. Use it as your ace in the hole. When he realizes he has been played, he will come at you. That is when you drop the hammer." I took the folder. I felt a surge of adrenaline. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was a construction project. I was building a cage. "I'm going to call my lawyer," I said, opening the car door, "but not to fight them. I am going to tell him to draw up a settlement offer. I am going to give them the keys to the kingdom." Sam nodded. "Be careful, Elijah. When a rat realizes it is trapped, it bites." "Let him bite," I said, stepping out into the rain. "I have dealt with rats before. You just have to make sure the trap snaps shut on the neck, not the tail." I walked back to my car, the rain soaking my shirt. I didn't care. I felt energized. I felt powerful. Chadwick Vance thought he was the hunter. He thought he was playing a game of chess with a senile old man. He didn't realize that I wasn't playing chess. I was pouring cement, and he was standing right in the middle of the wet mix, waiting to sink. I started my engine. The radio came on playing an old blues song. It was perfect. I hummed along as I drove out of the parking lot. The demolition was over. It was time for the reconstruction to begin. And the first brick in the new wall was going to be a worthless house in Florida, wrapped in a beautiful, deceitful bow. I picked up the phone and dialed the number on the letterhead. My hand was trembling, but not from fear. It was trembling from the adrenaline of the gamble I was about to take. I was about to bluff a shark, a con man, and a traitor all at the same time. Leonard Sterling answered on the second ring. His voice was smooth, like oil on water. "Mr. Thorne," he said, "I assume you are calling to discuss the surrender of your assets? Or should I prepare for the deposition next week?" I cleared my throat, making my voice sound weak and raspy. I let a little bit of the old man tremble creep into my tone. "I can't do this, Mr. Sterling," I said. "I am 72 years old. My heart. The doctor says the stress is too much. I can't go to court. I can't have my name dragged through the mud anymore." I heard the smile in his voice. It was the sound of a predator sensing blood in the water. "Well, Elijah, litigation is a heavy burden. We are willing to discuss a settlement, but my clients have suffered greatly. Mr. Miller has significant trauma, and your wife, well, she is destitute." I took a deep breath. "I want to meet," I said. "Tomorrow morning. I have an offer. It is not the $5 million. I don't have that kind of cash. But I have something better. Something worth a fortune." The next morning I walked into the glass-walled conference room of Sterling Vance and Associates in downtown Atlanta. I wore my oldest suit, the one that was a little too big for me now that I had lost weight from stress. I made sure my tie was crooked. I wanted to look defeated. I wanted to look like a man who had given up. They were already there. Vivian was sitting at the head of the table wearing a new dress that I knew I had paid for. She looked nervous, her eyes darting away from mine. Next to her sat Brad, or Chadwick as I knew him now. He was shifting uncomfortably in his chair, a donut cushion under him. He still looked like he was in pain, which gave me a small spark of joy, but mostly he looked hungry. His eyes tracked me as I walked in, assessing me, calculating my worth. Leonard Sterling sat between them, a silver-haired man with a tan that looked like it came from a bottle. "Have a seat, mister," Thorne Sterling said, gesturing to a lone chair on the opposite side of the table. "Let's hear this offer." I sat down. I didn't look at Vivian. I looked at my hands resting on the mahogany table. "I don't have $5 million. I began, my voice barely a whisper. "You know that. You have seen my bank accounts. The safe is empty because Vivian emptied it." Vivian opened her mouth to protest, but Sterling silenced her with a raised hand. But I continued, reaching into my briefcase. "I have an asset that I have been holding on to for 10 years. It was supposed to be our golden parachute, Vivian. Remember, I pulled out a thick document bound in a blue cover. I slid it across the table. "The deed to the property in Santa Rosa Beach, Florida," I said. Brad's ears perked up. He leaned forward, ignoring the pain in his lower regions. "Florida? Where in Florida?" "Santa Rosa Beach," I said. "Right on the Emerald Coast. 3 acres. Beachfront access." I saw Brad pull out his phone under the table. I knew exactly what he was doing. He was opening Zillow. He was typing in the address on the deed. I had checked Zillow that morning, because the county hadn't updated the environmental status in their public database, yet the algorithm still valued the property based on the surrounding luxury homes. $950,000. I watched Brad's eyes widen. He nudged Vivian under the table. I saw him mouth the word million. I sighed, rubbing my temples as if I had a migraine. "I bought this land in '98, I lied. I built a shell of a house on it. The plan was to finish it next year. It is a mansion, Vivian. 5 bedrooms. A wraparound porch. It is debt-free. No mortgage. I own it free and clear." "Why are you giving it up?" Sterling asked, his eyes narrow. "Lawyers are harder to fool than con men." "Because I just want peace," I said, looking at Vivian with sad, tired eyes. "I am tired of fighting. I am tired of the noise. You can have the Florida house. It is worth nearly $1 million now, and probably double that if you finish the interior. You take the house. You drop the lawsuit. You sign a waiver claiming no further demands. And you leave me my pension and this house in Atlanta." Vivian looked at the deed. She remembered the Florida trip we took years ago. She remembered the white sand. She didn't remember that I had spent that entire trip arguing with inspectors about the water table. "Elijah," she said softly, "that was your dream house." "It was our dream house," I corrected. "But the dream is dead. You take it. Brad seems to know real estate. He can develop it. He can sell it. You two can have your fresh start." Brad interjected, his voice eager. He had seen the Zillow estimate. He saw $1 million of equity that he could borrow against immediately. He saw a way to pay off the Sharks in New Orleans and still have enough left over for a new Porsche. "We will take it," Brad said quickly. Sterling looked at his client. "Mr. Miller, perhaps we should get an appraisal first. We should send an inspector down there." "No," Brad snapped. He was desperate. He couldn't wait weeks for an inspection. He needed assets in his name now. "We know the area. Santa Rosa is booming. If he is offering $1 million property to settle a lawsuit that might drag on for years, we take it." He turned to Vivian and grabbed her hand. "Babe, think about it. We can move down there. We can finish the house, or we can flip it next month for quick cash. It is a no-brainer." Vivian looked at me. She saw a broken old man handing over his last treasure. She saw a victory. "Okay," she said. "We accept." Sterling frowned. He didn't like it. He smelled a rat. But he worked for them. If the clients wanted to settle, he had to facilitate it. "Fine," Sterling said. "We will draft the settlement agreement. Mr. Thorne transfers the property via a quitclaim deed to both Mr. Miller and Mrs. Thorne as joint tenants. In exchange, the lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice, and Mrs. Thorne waives all claims to the Atlanta residence and Mr. Thorne's pension." "One condition," I said, raising a finger. They all froze. "I want it done today," I said. "I want the quitclaim signed now. I have a notary waiting in the lobby. I want this over. I can't sleep another night knowing this is hanging over my head. If we wait for inspections and appraisals, I might change my mind. I might decide to fight." I stared at Brad. I challenged his greed. "Take it now as is, or I see you in court and I spend every last dime I have fighting you until I die." Brad looked at Sterling. "Do it," he ordered. "Draw up the papers." Sterling sighed and opened his laptop. For the next hour, the only sound in the room was the clicking of keys and the scratching of pens. I sat there silent, watching them sign their names. Vivian signed with a flourish. Brad signed with a shaky hand, his greed making him vibrate. They were signing a quit-claim deed. That meant I was transferring whatever interest I had in the property to them. It also meant I was transferring all the liabilities. When the notary stamped the final document, I stood up. I felt 20 pounds lighter. "It is done," I asked. "It is done," Sterling said, handing me my copy of the dismissal. "The Florida property is theirs. The lawsuit is gone. You are a free man, Mr. Thorne, albeit a much poorer one." Brad grabbed the deed. He held it like a trophy. He grinned at me, a smile full of malice and triumph. "Thanks for the retirement fund, old man," he sneered. "Don't worry, we will send you a postcard from the beach. Maybe you can come down and fix the toilet for us someday." Vivian didn't look at me. She was already looking at pictures of furniture on her phone, planning the decor for a house she had never stepped foot inside. "Goodbye, Vivian," I said. I turned and walked out of the conference room. I walked past the receptionist. I walked out of the building and into the bright Atlanta sunshine. I walked a block away to a park bench and sat down. I loosened my tie. I took a deep breath of the city air. They had the deed. They officially owned the property. What they didn't know, what Zillow didn't know yet, was that the property was sitting on a protected wetland sinkhole. The foundation I had poured 10 years ago had cracked in half. The structure was condemned by the county 3 months ago. And just last week, the EPA had issued a final notice regarding the chemical runoff from the previous owner's illegal dumping, a notice that carried a cleanup fine of $400,000. The fine was attached to the property owner. Yesterday, that was me. Today, it was Brad Miller and Vivian Thorne. By signing that quit-claim deed as is, and by rushing the process to avoid inspection, they had just legally assumed responsibility for a toxic waste site that couldn't be built on, couldn't be sold, and came with a $500,000 federal bill attached to it. Brad thought he had just acquired a $1 million asset. In reality, he had just strapped a financial suicide vest to his chest. I pulled out my phone and called Sam. "Did they take the bait?" Sam asked. "Hook, line, and sinker," I said, watching a pigeon peck at a crumb on the sidewalk. "They own the swamp, Sam." Sam laughed. A deep belly laugh. "How long until they find out Brad owes money in New Orleans?" I said. "He is going to try to leverage that deed for a loan within 24 hours. As soon as the bank runs a title search and sees the EPA liens..." "Boom," Sam said. "Boom," I repeated. I stood up and started walking toward my car. I had saved my house. I had saved my pension. And I had planted a time bomb in the lap of the man who tried to destroy me. But I wasn't done. The financial ruin was just the beginning. Now that Brad was about to be squeezed by the federal government and the loan sharks, he was going to panic. And a panicked rat does stupid things. I was counting on it. I got into my car and drove home. For the first time in weeks, the driveway looked beautiful. The house looked welcoming. It was all mine again. I walked into the garage, picked up a sledgehammer, and weighed it in my hands. It felt good. It felt real. Brad Miller wanted to play developer fine. I had just given him his first project. "Good luck pouring a foundation in quicksand, you son of a bitch." The sound of a pen scratching against paper is usually a quiet thing. It is a whisper. But in that sterile, glass-walled conference room on the 42nd floor of the Sterling Vance and Associates building, my signature sounded like a thunderclap. Or perhaps more accurately, it sounded like the click of a steel trap snapping shut. I sat at the mahogany table, my posture slumped, my shoulders rounded. I made sure to look every one of my 72 years. I wanted them to see a defeated old man. I wanted them to see a husband who had been crushed by the weight of a $5 million lawsuit and a heartless divorce. I gripped the expensive fountain pen Leonard Sterling had handed me. My hand trembled. It wasn't a tremble of fear, though they didn't know that. It was the tremble of a marksman holding his breath before the trigger pull. Opposite me, Vivian and Brad were practically vibrating. Brad, or Chadwick as I knew him in my head, was leaning so far over the table I thought he might fall out of his chair. His eyes were glued to the document in front of me, the quitclaim deed. The magic piece of paper that would transfer ownership of 3 acres of Florida beachfront property from Elijah Thorne to Vivian Thorne and Bradley Miller. Brad was sweating. I could smell it. a mix of expensive cologne and cheap desperation. He needed this asset. He needed it to show his loan sharks in New Orleans that he was good for the money. He needed it to fund the lavish lifestyle he had promised Vivian. He looked at that paper like a starving dog looks at a ribeye steak. Vivian sat next to him, her chin held high. She was trying to look regal, trying to look like the sophisticated socialite she always pretended to be. But I saw the greed in her eyes too. She saw this house as her ticket to a new life, a life where she didn't have to look at my calloused hands or listen to my stories about pouring concrete. Mr. Thorne Leonard Sterling said, his voice impatient. We need the signature on the final line, to finalize the transfer and the release of liability. I looked up at Sterling. He was a smart lawyer. I could see a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He thought it was too easy. He thought I was folding too fast. But his job wasn't to save me. His job was to get what his clients wanted. And his clients wanted the deed. I looked at Vivian one last time. Are you sure about this, Vivian? I asked, my voice cracking just enough to sound pathetic. This was supposed to be our retirement. It was supposed to be the place we watched the sunset together. Vivian rolled her eyes. A cruel, dismissive gesture that I had seen 1,000 times in the last 10 years. Just sign the paper, Elijah, she snapped. Stop being dramatic. You had 10 years to build that house and you never finished it. You were too slow, too cautious. Brad is going to turn it into a palace. Just sign it so we can all move on. Too cautious. That was her assessment of my life. I wasn't cautious, Vivian. I was thorough. I checked the foundations. I checked the soil. I checked the laws. Things you never bothered to do. I lowered the pen. I pressed the nib to the paper. I signed my name. Elijah J. Thorne. The ink was black and permanent. With that signature, I wasn't just giving them a piece of land. I was giving them the federal EPA lien attached to the land. I was giving them the county condemnation order. I was giving them the $400,000 fine for toxic runoff that had been assessed to the property owner just last week. I pushed the document across the table. It is yours, I whispered. Brad snatched the paper before it even stopped moving. He didn't read it. He didn't check the fine print. He just flipped to the back page where his signature was required. He signed it so hard he almost tore the paper. Vivian signed next to him, a flourish of loops and swirls as if she were signing an autograph. Sterling took the document. He pulled out his notary stamp. Ka-chunk. The sound echoed in the room. It was done. The transfer was legal. The liability had shifted. Brad let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for an hour. He leaned back in his chair, a smug grin spreading across his face. He reached out and draped his arm around Vivian's shoulders, pulling her close. Pleasure doing business with you, Elijah, Brad said. He didn't call me Mr. Thorne anymore. The respect was gone because he thought the power was gone. You made the right choice. No point in fighting a war you can't win. Vivian stood up, smoothing down her dress. She picked up her designer purse, the one I bought her for Christmas. She looked down at me, and for a moment I thought I might see a glimmer of pity. But I didn't. I saw triumph. You know, Elijah, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. You really are getting old. 10 years ago you would have fought this. You would have argued. But today you just rolled over. I guess age really does make you soft. She laughed, a short, sharp sound. Thank you for the gift, she added. We will think of you when we are drinking mimosas on the balcony. I slowly stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I picked up my briefcase, which contained nothing but a sandwich and a bottle of water. You do that, Vivian, I said softly. You enjoy the view. I turned and walked toward the door. I didn't look back. I didn't want them to see the small smile that was fighting to break through on my face. I wanted to get out of the building before the reality of what they had just done crashed down on them. I walked out of the conference room, past the receptionist, and toward the elevators. Vivian and Brad were right behind me. They were laughing, talking loudly about tile samples and pool designs. They were already spending the money they thought they had made. We stepped into the elevator together. It was a long ride down to the lobby. The silence was thick, but it wasn't awkward for them. They were glowing. I stood in the corner watching the numbers count down. 40, 30, 20. When the doors opened in the marble lobby, the sunlight was streaming in through the revolving doors. It looked like freedom. Brad clapped me on the shoulder, hard. It was a gesture of dominance. Don't worry, old-timer, he said. We will send you an invite to the housewarming, if we have room. They walked ahead of me, strutting toward the exit. They looked like a power couple. They looked untouchable. And then it happened. Vivian's phone began to ring. It was a loud, jarring ringtone, some pop song she had downloaded to feel young. She stopped in the middle of the lobby to dig it out of her purse. I slowed my pace. I wanted to hear this. "Hello," she answered, her voice cheerful. I couldn't hear the voice on the other end, but I knew who it was. It was Jason, my son-in-law, the man who handled the family's emergency contacts, the man whose email was linked to the bank alerts because Vivian was too technically illiterate to set them up herself. I watched Vivian's back. I watched her posture. "Jason," she said, sounding annoyed. "What is it?" "We are celebrating. We just signed the papers." There was a pause. A long pause. I saw Vivian's shoulders stiffen. I saw her hand grip the phone tighter. "What do you mean?" she asked. Her voice wasn't cheerful anymore. It was sharp. What alert Brad stopped walking. He turned to look at her. "What is it, babe?" Vivian held up a hand to silence him. She was listening. "Jason, you are not making sense," she said, her voice rising in pitch. "What debt? We just got an asset. We got the house. Elijah transferred it to us. It is worth $1 million. I stopped by a potted plant near the door, pretending to check my watch. I was close enough to hear her now. She went silent again. Then she gasped. It was a sound of pure horror. $400,000, she shrieked. Heads turned in the lobby. The security guard looked up. Vivian turned around. Her eyes scanned the room wildly until they locked on me. Her face was pale. All the blood had drained out of it. She looked like she had seen a ghost. "Jason says," she stammered into the phone, her eyes never leaving mine. "Jason says the bank just froze our joint account. He says a federal lien was just attached to my social security number. An EPA lien for toxic waste cleanup." Brad dropped his briefcase. It hit the marble floor with a loud crack. What Brad shouted. "Give me that phone." He snatched the phone from her hand. "Who is this, Jason? What are you talking about? We didn't sign for a debt. We signed for a deed." I could hear Jason's voice shouting through the tiny speaker, tinny and frantic. "You signed a quitclaim. You took the title as is. That property is condemned, Brad. The EPA has been trying to serve Elijah for months, but the debt follows the title. As soon as the transfer was recorded electronically, the feds attached the lien to the new owners." Brad looked at the phone. He looked at the deed he was still clutching in his other hand. Then he looked at me. His arrogance was gone. The smug smile was gone. In its place was the look of a man who realizes the grenade he is holding has no pin. "You," he whispered. I didn't say a word. I just nodded. A slow, respectful nod. Brad dropped the phone. He looked at the paper in his hand as if it were burning his skin. "The fine is $400,000, Vivian wailed, grabbing Brad's arm. "And Jason says the property is condemned. It is a sinkhole. We can't sell it." Brad's face turned a violent shade of red. He took a step toward me. "You set us up," he roared. "You knew. You old son of a bitch. You knew." I straightened my back. I wasn't the slumped, defeated old man anymore. I stood at my full height. I buttoned my jacket. "I told you, Brad," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the lobby. "I told you I wanted to give you exactly what you deserved." I checked my watch for real this time. "It takes about 24 hours for the IRS to get notified of a federal lien transfer," I said calmly. "But since you owe money to those gentlemen in New Orleans, I imagine they check your credit more frequently than the IRS. I would suggest you start running now." Brad looked at the door. He looked at Vivian. He looked at the deed. He was doing the math. He was realizing that he hadn't just lost a payday. He had acquired a debt that would bankrupt him, expose his fake identity, and alert every creditor he was hiding from. Vivian rushed toward me. Elijah, you have to undo this." "Take it back. We didn't know you tricked us." I stepped back, avoiding her grasping hands. "I didn't trick you, Vivian. I gave you a choice. You could have done an inspection. You could have waited. But you were greedy. You wanted it all, and you wanted it now." I looked at the revolving door. "Well, now you have it all." I turned and walked through the doors, pushing them with a steady, rhythmic strength. Behind me, I could hear shouting. I could hear Vivian crying. I could hear Brad screaming at his lawyer on the phone. But out on the street, the traffic was humming. The birds were singing. It was a beautiful day in Atlanta. I took out my phone and sent a text message to Sam. Package delivered. Trap sprung. I put the phone away and started walking toward the subway. I had a lot of work to do, but for the first time in months I wasn't working for them. I was working for myself. And the first item on my agenda was a nice quiet lunch. Alone. I sat in the small, unassuming diner down the street from the lawyer's office, ordering a tuna melt and a black coffee. I watched the steam rise from the cup, swirling in the air like the chaos I had just unleashed. For the first time in months, my appetite was back. I took a bite of the sandwich, savoring the taste of victory. It tasted like pickles and justice. While I was eating, my phone buzzed on the table. It was Jason. "Dad," he whispered, his voice frantic. "I am looking at the bank alerts. The freeze is real. The Department of Environmental Protection doesn't play around. They locked down everything linked to Mom's social security number, the joint account, her savings, even the credit card she gave to Brad. It is all frozen pending the payment of the fine." I took a sip of coffee. "Good work, Jason." "But Dad," Jason continued, sounding terrified. How did you know? How did you know they would sign without checking the title? Because, son," I said, wiping my mouth with a paper napkin, "greed is a blinder. It makes you see the gold but miss the trap door underneath it." I hung up and leaned back in the booth. I closed my eyes and imagined the scene that was unfolding right now in the lobby of Sterling Vance and Associates. I didn't need to be there to see it. I knew the players too well. You see, that Florida house wasn't just a bad investment. It was a curse. I bought it in '98 thinking I could fix it up. I was younger then, arrogant. I thought I could outsmart nature. But the ground down there is tricky. It is swampland disguised as paradise. 5 years ago, the county declared the foundation unstable. I spent $50,000 trying to shore it up, but the sinkhole just kept eating the concrete. Then came the EPA. Turns out the previous owner had used the land as a dumping ground for industrial solvents back in the '80s. The chemicals had leached into the groundwater. I didn't know until the inspectors came knocking. They slapped a remediation order on the property. Clean it up or pay the fine. The cleanup cost was estimated at $300,000. The fine for non-compliance had grown to nearly $500,000. I had spent the last 5 years fighting them in court, trying to prove I didn't dump the chemicals. I was stuck in a legal purgatory. I couldn't sell the land because no one buys a toxic waste site. I couldn't give it away because no one wants the liability. I was trapped. Until today. Until Brad Miller and Vivian Thorne walked into a room blinded by dollar signs and signed a quitclaim deed. A quitclaim is a beautiful legal instrument. It transfers the interest of the grantor to the grantee. Whatever I own, you now own, including the dirt, including the debt, including the federal liens. I imagined Brad right now. He was probably sweating through that cheap suit of his. Back in the lobby, the reality was setting in. Brad was staring at his phone where his banking app was showing a big red notification: account frozen, federal levy. He turned to Vivian. The charm was gone. The smooth, loving boyfriend mask had cracked and fallen to the floor, shattering into a million pieces. "You idiot!" he screamed, his voice echoing off the marble walls. "You stupid, gullible woman!" Vivian recoiled as if he had slapped her. "Brad, what are you saying? We can fix this. We can sell the house to pay the fine. Sell it!" Brad roared, grabbing her by the shoulders and shaking her. "Who are we going to sell it to, Vivian? Who buys a condemned sinkhole with a $500,000 federal lien? He played us. Your husband played us like a fiddle, and you helped him hold the bow." He pushed her away. She stumbled in her high heels, catching herself against the wall. "You told me he was senile," Brad shouted, pacing in a tight circle, running his hands through his hair. "You told me he was a pushover. You said, 'Oh, Elijah just wants peace. Elijah is weak.' He wasn't being weak, Vivian. He was offloading a toxic asset. He just dumped his garbage on us, and we thanked him for it." Vivian started to cry. But these weren't the manipulative tears she used on me. These were tears of genuine terror. But we have the lawsuit," she stammered. "We can sue him again. We can tell the judge he tricked us." "With what money?" Brad spat. "My accounts are frozen because my name is on the deed with yours, the Sharks in New Orleans. They track my credit, Vivian. They are going to see this lien. They are going to know I am broke. They are going to know I can't pay them." He looked at her with pure disgust. "You have ruined me," he whispered. "I came here for a payday, I came here for an easy mark, and instead I am handcuffed to a toxic waste dump and a woman who is dumber than a bag of hammers." Vivian gasped. You said you loved me. You said we were soulmates. I loved your portfolio," Brad yelled, not caring who heard him anymore. "I loved the idea of the settlement. Look at you, Vivian. You are 65 years old. You have nothing. And now, thanks to your brilliant negotiation skills, you have less than nothing. You have debt. Federal debt. They will garnish your Social Security. They will take your jewelry. They will take everything." He turned and started walking toward the exit, walking fast. "Where are you going?" Vivian cried, running after him. "Brad, don't leave me. Get away from me," he shouted, pushing through the revolving doors. "I have to make some calls. I have to figure out how to disappear before the guys from the bayou come looking for me." He stormed out onto the street, leaving Vivian standing alone in the lobby of the law firm. People were staring. The security guard was watching her with pity. She looked down at the deed in her hand. The paper was wrinkled where she had clutched it. Elijah J. Thorne. The signature stared back at her. It looked strong. It looked decisive. For the first time, she realized that the man she had lived with for 40 years wasn't boring. He wasn't simple. He was a fortress, and she had just voluntarily walked out of the fortress and into the line of fire. I finished my coffee at the diner. I paid the bill with cash that was safe in my pocket, untraceable and unfrozen. I walked out to my car. The sun seemed brighter, the air seemed cleaner. I had just executed a maneuver that would make a chess grandmaster proud. I had sacrificed a queen the Florida house to checkmate the king. But the game wasn't over. Brad was cornered, and a cornered rat doesn't just run, it bites. He was going to come for me. He was going to try violence because he had lost the legal battle. I reached into my glove box and pulled out the file Sam had given me. The file on Chadwick Vance. The file that detailed his past crimes, his aliases, and his outstanding warrants in Mississippi. "Let him come," I whispered to the empty car. I started the engine. I wasn't going home to hide. I was going to the hardware store. I needed to buy some new locks. And maybe, just maybe, I would buy a new rocking chair for the front porch, because I had a feeling I was going to want a front row seat for the show that was about to start. Brad Miller was about to find out that while he was playing a con, I was playing the long game. And in the long game, the house always wins, especially when the house was built by Elijah Thorne. The suite at the Ritz-Carlton was supposed to be the headquarters of their new life. It was supposed to be the place where Vivian and Brad planned the renovation of their $1 million Florida mansion. But tonight it felt like a cage. And inside the cage, a tiger was pacing back and forth, starving and terrified. I wasn't there, of course. I was sitting on my front porch listening to the crickets and watching the fireflies dance in the heavy Georgia humidity. But I can tell you exactly what happened in that hotel room. I know because I know the players. And I know what happens when a rat realizes the ship isn't just sinking, but is already underwater. Brad Miller, or Chadwick Vance as his criminal record stated, was losing his mind. His phone had been ringing nonstop for 3 hours. It wasn't the bank anymore. It was the other creditors, the ones who didn't use lawyers, the ones who used tire irons. They had seen the federal lien alert on his credit report. They knew he was burned, and they wanted their money. Vivian sat on the edge of the king-size bed, clutching a pillow. She was wearing a silk robe, but she looked small and frail. Her eyes were red from crying. She watched Brad pace. He was sweating through his shirt. He had consumed the entire mini bar, little bottles of vodka and whiskey scattered across the expensive carpet like spent shell casings. "Brad, please," Vivian whispered. "You are making me nervous. Sit down. We can figure this out." Brad stopped. He turned to her. His eyes were wild, the pupils were dilated. The charm that had seduced her, the smooth voice that had convinced her to steal my retirement fund, was gone. In its place was a snarl. "Figure it out," he laughed, a high manic sound. "How are we going to figure it out, Vivian? Do you have $400,000 hidden in your girdle? Because unless you do, I am a dead man walking." He kicked a suitcase across the room. It slammed into the wall, knocking a painting crooked. "We can call a lawyer," Vivian suggested, her voice trembling. "We can sue Elijah for fraud." Brad walked over to her. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. She could smell the alcohol and the fear on his breath. "You stupid old woman," he hissed. "We can't sue him. We signed a quitclaim. Do you know what that means?" It means we accepted the property as is. We accepted the dirt. We accepted the debt. Any lawyer will laugh us out of the office. And even if we could sue, it takes years. I don't have years, Vivian. I don't have days. I have guys coming from New Orleans who are going to break my legs if I don't wire them 50 grand by midnight. Vivian shrank back. She had never seen him like this. She had only seen the gentleman, the lover. "Don't talk to me like that," she whimpered. "I am your partner. I left my husband for you. You left your husband because you are greedy." Brad spat, straightening up. "You thought I was your ticket to the high life. You thought I was going to take you to Paris. Well, guess what? I am broke. And now, thanks to your husband, I am worse than broke. I am a target." He turned away from her and started rifling through the drawers of the dresser. He was throwing clothes onto the floor, looking for something. "What are you doing?" Vivian asked, standing up. "I need cash," Brad muttered. "I need pawnable items. Where's your watch? Where's that diamond tennis bracelet you were wearing yesterday?" Vivian gasped. "Those are mine. Elijah bought those for me for our 30th anniversary." Brad spun around. "He doesn't own them anymore, and neither do you. We are in this together, right? That is what you said. Partners." He lunged for her purse sitting on the vanity table. Vivian screamed and tried to grab it first. "No, you can't take my jewelry. It is all I have left." She grabbed the strap of the purse. Brad grabbed the body of it. They struggled. It was a pathetic, ugly tug of war in a luxury hotel room. A 65-year-old woman fighting a 46-year-old con man for the last scraps of her dignity. "Let go," Brad shouted. He yanked the purse hard. Vivian lost her footing. She stumbled forward. Brad didn't catch her. He didn't steady her. Out of pure reflex, out of pure frustration and rage, he swung his backhand. Crack. The sound of flesh hitting flesh was loud in the quiet room. His knuckles connected with her cheekbone. It wasn't a slap. It was a punch. Vivian cried out and fell backward, hitting the floor hard. She lay there, stunned. She touched her face. Her fingers came away bloody. Her lip was split. Her cheek was already swelling. She looked up at him. She looked at the man she had destroyed her family for, the man she had defended to her daughter, the man she had chosen over me. He was standing over her, breathing hard. He held the purse. He didn't look sorry. He looked annoyed that she had made him do it. "Look what you made me do," he muttered. He unzipped the purse and dumped the contents onto the bed. Lipstick tissues, credit cards that were now frozen, and a small velvet pouch. He grabbed the pouch. He opened it. Inside was the diamond bracelet and her sapphire earrings. My grandmother's earrings. "This will buy me a bus ticket and maybe a week of quiet," Brad said, stuffing the jewelry into his pocket. Vivian tried to sit up. Her head was spinning. "Brad, you hit me." Brad didn't answer. He grabbed his duffel bag. He started shoving his clothes into it. "I am leaving, Vivian. Don't follow me. And if anyone asks, you haven't seen me?" He zipped the bag. He looked at her one last time. There was no love in his eyes. There wasn't even hate. There was just cold indifference. "You really should have stayed with the contractor," he said. "At least he kept the roof over your head. I am just the storm that blew it down." He walked out the door. The heavy hotel door clicked shut. Vivian was alone. She was bleeding. She was broke. She was lying on the carpet of a room she couldn't pay for. She crawled to the nightstand. She reached for the hotel phone. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely dial. She didn't call the police. The shame was too great. She couldn't bear the thought of the flashing lights, the questions, the news crews seeing her like this. She dialed the only number she had known by heart for 40 years. I was just finishing my iced tea when my phone buzzed. I looked at the screen. It was the hotel's number. I knew. I felt it in my bones. I slid the button to answer. "Hello, Elijah." Her voice was a broken whisper. It was wet with tears and blood. "Elijah, help me." I stayed silent. I listened to her breathing. "He hit me, Elijah," she sobbed. "He hit me in the face. He took my jewelry. He took your grandmother's earrings. He left. I am bleeding. Please, Elijah. Please come get me. I am scared." I closed my eyes. A part of me, the part that had been her husband for 4 decades, wanted to jump in the car. That was instinct. That was muscle memory. You hear your wife cry, you run to help. But then I remembered the glue. I remembered the laughter in the BMW. I remembered the empty safe. I remembered the smirk on her face when she signed the deed yesterday. I opened my eyes. I looked at the empty rocking chair next to me. "Where are you, Vivian?" I asked calmly. "I am at the Ritz," she cried. "Room 304. Please hurry. It hurts." I took a deep breath. "Vivian, listen to me carefully," I said. "You need to hang up this phone." "What?" "No, just come." "Hang up the phone." I repeated, my voice hard as granite. "And dial 911. "No, I can't. It is too embarrassing. Just come get me. I want to come home." "You don't have a home here anymore," I said. The silence on the other end was deafening. "Elijah," she whispered. "But he beat me." "I know," I said. "And that is a crime. That is why you call the police. They will send an ambulance. They will take photos of your injuries. They will file a report. That is what you need. You need the law." "But I need you," she wailed. "I need my husband." I gripped the phone tight. "Your husband died the day you invited another man into his car. Vivian, I am just the man you are suing. I am just the defendant. Elijah, please, don't do this. I am sorry, I was wrong. He is a monster. He is the monster you chose," I said. "You chose him when you stole my money. You chose him when you signed that deed. You made a bed with a snake, Vivian. Now you have to deal with the bite, but I am alone." "We are all alone in the end," I said. "I was alone when I found out about the affair. I was alone when I opened that empty safe. You didn't care about me then. Elijah, call 911, Vivian. Tell them Chadwick Vance assaulted you. Tell them he stole the jewelry. That is your best chance of getting anything back, but don't call me again." I pulled the phone away from my ear. I could still hear her screaming my name. It was a ghostly sound, thin and desperate. I pressed the red button. The call ended. I sat there for a long time. My heart was pounding heavy and slow. It didn't feel good. Revenge isn't sweet like they say in the movies. It tastes like ash. It tastes like regret. But it was necessary. If I went there, if I picked her up, if I brought her home and cleaned her wounds, I would be telling her that what she did was acceptable. I would be telling her that she could destroy me and I would still be her safety net. I wasn't a safety net anymore. I was a wall. And she had crashed into me at 100 miles an hour. I stood up and walked inside the house. I locked the front door. I threw the deadbolt. Then I went to the kitchen and poured the rest of my tea down the sink. I looked at the microwave clock. 9:15 p.m. Somewhere in the city, sirens began to wail. I hoped she had listened. I hoped she had called. But whether she did or not, it wasn't my job to fix it. My shift had ended 3 days ago. I turned off the porch light, plunging the front of the house into darkness. For the first time in 40 years, I wasn't waiting up for anyone. And despite the sadness, there was peace in the dark. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? I sat in my armchair by the window, watching the rain streak against the glass, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I had left my wife bleeding in a hotel room, telling her to call the police on the man she had left me for. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. But I knew that if I went to save her, I would only be enabling the cycle of abuse and betrayal that had destroyed our family. I had to let her hit rock bottom. But while I was sitting in the dark, miles away on Interstate 85, the hammer of justice was about to fall. And it wasn't wielded by me. It was wielded by the one man I had underestimated for 10 years. My son-in-law, Jason. I learned the details later, piece by piece, as Jason recounted the story to me over a cup of strong coffee. But in my mind, I can see it as clearly as if I was sitting in the passenger seat of his rig. It was just after 10 in the evening. Jason was driving Unit 42, a heavy Ford ambulance, back to the station. He had just dropped off a cardiac arrest patient at Piedmont Hospital. He was tired. His shift had been 12 hours of chaos. He was thinking about Maya, about his marriage, about the mess Vivian had created. He was driving in the right lane, cruising at the speed limit, the wipers slapping a steady rhythm against the windshield. Then he saw it. A silver Mercedes convertible tore past him in the left lane. It was moving fast. Too fast for the wet roads. At least 90 miles an hour. It swerved, cutting off a semi-truck, nearly clipping the front bumper. The trucker blasted his air horn, a long, angry sound that echoed in the night. Jason is a trained driver. He instinctively took his foot off the gas, creating distance. He watched the Mercedes weave in and out of traffic, its taillights blurring in the rain. He told me later that he didn't know who it was at first. He just saw a reckless driver, a danger to the public. He reached for his radio mic to call it in to dispatch. Dispatch, this is Unit 42. I have a reckless driver northbound on Interstate 85 near the Cheshire Bridge exit, silver Mercedes, Georgia plates, driving erratically, possible DUI. Copy 42, dispatch crackled back. We will notify Highway Patrol, keep your distance. Jason kept driving. The Mercedes slowed down as it hit a pocket of traffic. Jason's ambulance caught up, rolling into the lane next to it. The streetlights overhead cast a sickly yellow glow through the rain. As the ambulance pulled alongside the convertible, Jason looked down into the driver's seat. The Mercedes had a soft top, but the window was cracked open slightly to let out cigarette smoke. Jason saw the driver's profile. He saw the slicked back hair, now messy and wet. He saw the expensive jacket, and he saw the face. It was a face he had seen screaming in agony just 24 hours ago as firefighters cut the roof off a BMW. It was Brad, or Chadwick, or whatever name the devil was using tonight. Jason said his heart stopped for a second. He gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. This was the man who had destroyed his family. This was the man who had beaten his mother-in-law just hours ago, and now here he was, fleeing the city, driving like he owned the road. Brad looked up. He saw the ambulance. He saw the red lettering on the side, and for a split second he locked eyes with Jason. Jason saw the recognition. He saw the panic flare in Brad's eyes. Brad didn't see an EMT. He saw a witness. He saw judgment. Brad slammed on the gas. The Mercedes engine roared and the car fishtailed on the wet asphalt before shooting forward. Jason grabbed the mic again. His voice wasn't tired anymore. It was sharp. It was the voice of a man who was done being passive. Dispatch update on that reckless driver. Suspect is fleeing. And dispatch, I know the driver. He is wanted for assault and fraud. He is running. Jason didn't wait for permission. He flipped a switch on his dashboard. The sirens of Unit 42 wailed into life. The red and white lights exploded, bouncing off the wet pavement, illuminating the highway like a disco floor. Jason wasn't a cop. He couldn't pull Brad over. But he could make sure Brad didn't disappear into the dark. He could act as a beacon. The chase was on. Brad was erratic. He was desperate. He cut across 3 lanes of traffic, taking the exit ramp for Northeast Expressway at 80 miles an hour. The Mercedes tires screeched, struggling for grip. He clipped the guardrail, sending a shower of sparks into the night air. Jason followed. He kept the ambulance steady, his training kicking in. He wasn't trying to ram him. He was just staying on his tail, keeping the spotlight on the rat so the hawks could find him. Brad wove through the surface streets. He blew through a red light, narrowly missing a minivan. He was panicking. He knew his credit was frozen. He knew the loan sharks were coming. And now he had a 5-ton ambulance screaming behind him like the ghost of his consequences. Jason saw the blue lights in his rearview mirror before he heard them. The Georgia State Patrol had arrived. 2 cruisers shot past the ambulance, their engines screaming. They were faster, sleeker, designed for the hunt. Jason backed off, giving them room. He watched as the troopers executed a perfect pincer movement. One cruiser pulled alongside Brad, forcing him toward the shoulder. The other stayed tight on his bumper. Brad tried to swerve again, but there was nowhere to go. He slammed on his brakes. The Mercedes spun out, doing a full 360 on the wet road before slamming backward into a telephone pole. Crunch. Steam hissed from the radiator. The airbags deployed. Jason pulled the ambulance over about 50 yards back. He grabbed his medical kit. He was still a paramedic. Even if the victim was the devil himself, Jason had a duty to render aid. He ran toward the crash site. The troopers were already there, guns drawn. "Get out of the car. Show me your hands." The driver's door opened. Brad stumbled out. He wasn't hurt badly thanks to the airbags, but he was stumbling. He was shouting nonsense. "My leg. My leg. You can't touch me. I have a federal lien. I own property in Florida." He was raving. He was high. The troopers tackled him to the wet grass. They cuffed him. Jason approached his flashlight, cutting through the darkness. He shone the light on Brad's face. Brad's pupils were pinpricks. His nose was bleeding, and there was white powder residue on his upper lip. "Is he injured?" the trooper asked, looking at Jason. "He will live," Jason said, his voice cold. "Check his pockets." The trooper patted Brad down. He pulled out a baggie of white powder, cocaine. Then he reached into the other pocket and pulled out a velvet pouch. He dumped the contents into his hand. A diamond tennis bracelet. Sapphire earrings. Jason felt a surge of anger so hot it almost blinded him. He recognized those earrings. He had seen Vivian wearing them at Christmas for the last 10 years. "That is stolen property," Jason said, pointing at the jewelry. "That belongs to my mother-in-law. He assaulted her tonight at the Ritz-Carlton." Brad looked up from the mud. He saw Jason standing over him. "You," Brad spat blood and mud mixing on his face. "You are the ambulance driver. You are the one who cut the roof off. And you are the one going to jail," Jason said. The trooper hauled Brad to his feet. He read him his rights. "You are under arrest for reckless driving, evading arrest, possession of a controlled substance, and suspected theft." Brad started to cry. It was a pathetic wailing sound. "My life is over. You don't understand. I need that money. They're going to kill me." Jason didn't flinch. He walked back to the ambulance. He sat in the driver's seat and turned off the sirens. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was peaceful. He picked up his phone. He didn't call Maya. He didn't call the police station. He called me. I picked up on the first ring. "Jason, Dad," Jason said. His voice was shaking, but this time it was from adrenaline, not fear. "We got him." "What?" "We got him, Dad. I saw him on 85. I chased him down. The state patrol has him in cuffs. He wrecked the car. They found the drugs. And Dad, they found Mom's jewelry." I let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in my lungs for 40 years. I closed my eyes and leaned my head back against the chair. Is he gone?" "He is in the back of a squad car," Jason said. "He is going to the Fulton County Jail. And with the drugs and the theft, he isn't getting out anytime soon." "Thank you, son," I whispered. "Dad," Jason said, his voice softening. "Mom, the police are going to ask about the jewelry. We need to file a report." "I know," I said. "I told her to call 911. If she did, this will all tie together. If she didn't, well, we will cross that bridge tomorrow. Go home, Jason. Go get some sleep. You did good. You did real good." I hung up the phone. The nightmare was technically over. The monster was in a cage, but as I looked around my empty house, I knew the cleanup was just beginning. Brad was gone, but the wreckage he left behind, the debts, the broken trust, the shattered family was still right here in the living room. But for tonight, it was enough. I stood up and walked to the kitchen. I opened the fridge and took out a cold beer. I walked back to the porch. The rain had stopped. The air was cool. I cracked the beer open. The sound was crisp. "Here is to you, Jason," I said to the night sky. I took a long drink. The beer tasted bitter, but the aftertaste was sweet. It was the taste of a clean slate. Brad Miller had driven fast, but he forgot one thing. You can't outrun the truth. And you definitely can't outrun a family that has finally decided to fight back. The courtroom smelled of lemon polish and old misery. It was a smell I had grown to recognize over the last few weeks, the scent of lives being disassembled one legal motion at a time. I sat on the hard wooden bench, my hands clasped loosely in my lap. I was wearing my Sunday suit, the charcoal one with the pinstripes. It was freshly pressed. I had polished my shoes until I could see my own reflection in the leather. I looked like a man who was ready for church, not a man who was about to watch the final demolition of his 40-year marriage. On the other side of the aisle sat Vivian. If you had seen her 2 weeks ago in Leonard Sterling's office, you wouldn't have recognized the woman sitting there today. The arrogance was gone. The designer dress was gone. She was wearing a gray pantsuit that looked 2 sizes too big, likely pulled from the back of her closet. Her hair, usually dyed and teased to perfection, was pulled back in a severe, messy bun. She wasn't wearing makeup to hide the bruising on her cheek where Brad had struck her. It was fading now, a sickly yellow shadow, but it was still there, a badge of her bad decisions. And she was alone. Leonard Sterling, the shark in the $3,000 suit, was nowhere to be found. Once the money ran out, once the federal liens froze her assets, Sterling had vanished like smoke. Sitting next to her was a court-appointed attorney, a young woman who looked overworked and tired, shuffling through papers she had probably only glanced at 10 minutes ago. Vivian didn't look at me. She stared at the seal of the state of Georgia hanging behind the judge's bench. She looked small. She looked brittle. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Judge Eleanor Mathers walked in. She was a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen every lie a human being could tell. She sat down, adjusted her glasses, and looked at the docket. Thorne versus Thorne, she read. Petition for dissolution and final division of assets. Vivian's young lawyer stood up. She tried her best. "Your Honor," she began, her voice shaking slightly. My client, Mrs. Thorne, is a 65-year-old woman with no independent income. She has been a homemaker for 40 years. She is currently homeless, living in a temporary shelter, and is a victim of domestic abuse by a third party. We are asking for an equitable division of the marital home and spousal support so she can restart her life. She admits to the infidelity. Your Honor, but 40 years of marriage should not be erased by one mistake. One mistake. That is what they called it. Not a betrayal, not a theft, a mistake. Like forgetting to buy milk. My lawyer, a quiet man named Davis, whom Sam had recommended, stood up. He didn't make a speech. He didn't wave his arms. Your Honor, he said calmly, we are not contesting the length of the marriage. We are contesting the claim that Mrs. Thorne is entitled to any further assets. We argue that she has already dissipated the marital estate significantly, and more importantly has used marital funds to facilitate criminal activity. Judge Mathers looked up sharply. Criminal activity? Explain, counselor. Davis nodded to me. I reached into my briefcase. I pulled out a stack of documents. They were bank statements, but not the ones we had seen before. These were the ones Sam had recovered. These were the statements from a credit card I had forgotten about, a joint emergency card that Vivian had kept hidden in her jewelry box. We recovered these records 3 days ago, my lawyer said, handing the file to the bailiff to give to the judge. This credit card paid off monthly from Mr. Thorne's savings without his detailed knowledge, shows a pattern of cash advances. The judge opened the file. She flipped through the pages. So she spent money, the judge said. That is hardly criminal, counselor. Wives spend money. Look at the dates and locations. Your Honor, my lawyer said. I watched the judge's eyes scan the page. Cash advance $500. 2 a.m. Location, the Onyx Club. Cash advance $1,000. 11:30 p.m. Location, ATM near Simpson Street. Cash advance $2,000. 3 a.m. The judge frowned. These are large sums. Now look at the police report attached to the back. Your Honor, my lawyer continued. This is the arrest report for Mr. Bradley Miller, also known as Chadwick Vance, the man Mrs. Thorne left her husband for. When he was arrested last week after a high-speed chase, he was found in possession of a significant amount of cocaine. Vivian gasped. She covered her mouth with her hand. She hadn't known this part. She knew he was a con man. She knew he was abusive. She didn't know he was using her money to fuel a drug habit. Mr. Vance admitted during interrogation, my lawyer said, his voice dropping an octave for effect, that his lifestyle, including his drug purchases, was funded almost entirely by cash provided by Mrs. Vivian Thorne. The courtroom went silent. That isn't spending money on shoes, Your Honor, my lawyer concluded. That is funding a criminal enterprise with marital assets. That is dissipation of the estate for illegal purposes. Under Georgia law, that is grounds to deny any claim to the remaining assets. Vivian stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. I didn't know she cried out, tears streaming down her face. I didn't know it was for drugs. He told me it was for investments. He told me he needed cash for closing costs. Judge Mathers looked at Vivian. Her expression wasn't sympathetic. It was cold. Mrs. Thorne, sit down, the judge ordered. But I am a victim here, Vivian sobbed, collapsing back into her chair. He tricked me. Elijah, tell her I wouldn't buy drugs. I sat there stone-faced. I didn't look at her. I looked at the judge. Your Honor, I said, speaking for the first time. My voice was steady. It was the voice of a man who had already grieved and moved on. My wife emptied my safe of $200,000. She transferred a property into her name which is now burdened with federal fines. And now we see she drained our emergency credit line to feed her lover's addiction. I don't care if she knew or not. The money is gone. My sweat paid for that money, and she burned it. Judge Mathers nodded slowly. She closed the file. She took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. In my 20 years on the bench, the judge said, looking at Vivian, I have seen many cases of infidelity, but rarely have I seen such a reckless, destructive disregard for the marital partnership. She picked up her gavel. Mrs. Thorne, you claim you are a victim, and perhaps in regards to Mr. Vance you are. But in this marriage, you are the perpetrator. You systematically dismantled your family's financial security to please a stranger. You signed a quitclaim deed voluntarily to take a property you thought was valuable only to find out it was a liability. You bet against your husband, and you lost. The judge cleared her throat. Judgment is entered in favor of the petitioner Elijah Thorne. I held my breath. The marital home in Atlanta, the judge announced, her voice ringing out like a bell, is awarded 100% to Mr. Thorne. The pension is awarded 100% to Mr. Thorne. The truck and all personal property currently in the home are awarded to Mr. Thorne. Vivian let out a low moan. As for Mrs. Thorne, the judge continued, looking down at her. You are awarded the personal items currently in your possession. Furthermore, the court acknowledges the quitclaim deed signed by both parties last week. The property in Florida, along with all its current liens, debts, and federal fines, remains the sole property of Mrs. Thorne and Mr. Miller. No, Vivian shrieked. You can't. That house is a debt trap. It owes $500,000. You signed the paper, Mrs. Thorne, the judge said, banging the gavel. You wanted it. You got it. And regarding alimony, request denied. You used family funds to support a drug habit knowingly or not. This court will not ask a man to pay a monthly check to the woman who bankrupted him. Case closed. The gavel struck the wood. Bang. It was over. I stood up. I shook my lawyer's hand. Thank you, Davis. I turned to leave. Vivian was still sitting there, frozen. Her young lawyer was packing up her briefcase, looking eager to get away from the disaster. Vivian looked up at me. Her eyes were hollow. She looked like a ghost haunting her own life. Elijah, she whispered, where am I supposed to go? I stopped. I looked at the woman I had shared a bed with for 40 years. I looked for the love. I looked for the anger. I looked for anything. But there was only a vast, empty space where my heart used to be. I don't know, Vivian, I said softly. I have no money, she said, her voice trembling. I have no home. The shelter kicks me out at 8 in the morning. Elijah, please, just let me come home for a few days, just until I get on my feet. I will sleep in the guest room. I will clean. Please. I gripped the handle of my briefcase. You wanted a new life, Vivian, I said. You wanted excitement. You wanted a man who wasn't boring. I leaned in closer so only she could hear me. You called me a handyman. You mocked me for being a contractor. You said I smelled like sawdust. Well, here is a lesson from the job site. When you tear down a load-bearing wall, the roof collapses. You tore down the wall, Vivian. Don't look at me to hold up the ceiling. But I am your wife, she wailed, grabbing the sleeve of my jacket. I gently but firmly removed her hand from my arm. No, I said. You are the co-owner of a condemned property in Florida. I suggest you start walking south. It is a long way to the beach. I turned and walked down the center aisle of the courtroom. My shoes clicked against the floor. Click, click, click. Behind me I heard her sobbing. It was a raw, ugly sound. It was the sound of a woman realizing that the safety net she had spent 40 years cutting was finally gone. I pushed open the heavy double doors of the courtroom. Jason was waiting for me in the hallway. He was holding 2 cups of coffee. He looked nervous. Dad, he asked. How did it go? I took one of the coffees. I took a sip. It was hot. It was strong. It is done, I said. We kept the house. Jason let out a long sigh of relief. And Mom? I looked back at the closed doors. She got what she wanted, I said. She got her freedom. I put a hand on Jason's shoulder. Come on, son. I have a lot of empty space in the garage. I think it is time we finally built that woodworking shop we always talked about. We walked toward the exit, leaving the courthouse behind us. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel happy. I felt light. The weight of the lies, the weight of the betrayal, the weight of the $5 million lawsuit, it was all gone. I walked out into the city. The sun was shining. The traffic was moving. Life was going on. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to join it. I was Elijah Thorne. I was 72 years old, and I was just getting started. The parking garage beneath the Fulton County Courthouse is a cold place. It smells of exhaust fumes, damp concrete, and the lingering residue of 1,000 bad days. It is a place where lives are parked in neutral before they go their separate ways. I walked toward my truck, my footsteps echoing against the gray walls. Jason had gone ahead to bring the car around, giving me a moment of solitude. Or so I thought. I heard the rapid, uneven clicking of heels behind me. I knew that sound. For 40 years I could identify my wife by the sound of her walk. Usually it was a confident, rhythmic click. Today, it was a stumble. It was the sound of someone trying to run on a broken foundation. Elijah, wait. I stopped. I didn't turn around immediately. I stood there gripping the handle of my briefcase, staring at a concrete pillar painted with a yellow stripe. I took a deep breath, inhaling the gasoline smell, trying to steel myself for one last demolition job. I turned slowly. Vivian was standing about 10 feet away. In the harsh, flickering fluorescent light of the garage, she looked older than I had ever seen her. The shadows under her eyes were deep purple. Her hair, usually so perfect, was escaping from its bun in messy wisps. She was clutching her purse with both hands, holding it to her chest like a shield. She looked at me and her lip trembled. She took a step forward, her hand reaching out, hovering in the empty space between us. "Elijah," she whispered, "please, don't just walk away." I looked at her hand. It was the same hand that had signed the checks to pay for Brad's drugs. It was the same hand that had signed the quitclaim deed. "There is nothing left to say, Vivian," I said, my voice echoing in the cavernous space. "The judge said it all." "No," she said, shaking her head frantically. "The judge doesn't know us. The judge doesn't know about the 40 years. She doesn't know about the time we drove to Savannah and got lost in the rain. She doesn't know about the Christmas you built Maya that dollhouse." I felt a twinge in my chest. She was weaponizing our memories. She was trying to use the bricks of our past to build a bridge over the chasm she had created. "I remember the dollhouse," I said. "I stayed up for 3 nights sanding the wood so Maya wouldn't get splinters. You went to bed early because the noise of the saw bothered you." Vivian flinched. Tears began to spill down her cheeks, cutting through the layer of cheap powder she had applied. "I am sorry, Elijah," she sobbed. "I am so sorry. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But you have to understand. I was just so lonely." "Lonely?" I asked. The word tasted like bile in my mouth. "You lived in a 4-bedroom house. You had a daughter who called you every day. You had a husband who came home every night. But you were never really there," she cried, her voice rising, bouncing off the concrete ceiling. "You were always working. You were always tired. You would come home, eat dinner, and fall asleep in that chair. You stopped looking at me, Elijah. You stopped seeing me." She took another step closer, desperate to make me understand. "Brad, he saw me. He told me I was beautiful. He told me I was desirable. He made me feel like a woman again, not just a housekeeper. He brought me flowers. He took me dancing. He said things you haven't said to me in 20 years. I listened to her. I let her words hang in the stagnant air. "He told you were beautiful," I repeated. "Yes," she whispered, wiping her eyes. "That is all I wanted. I just wanted to feel special." I laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a short, sharp bark of disbelief. I looked at this woman, this stranger I had dedicated my life to, and I finally understood the fundamental disconnect between us. "You think love is words, Vivian?" I asked. "You think love is a cheap bouquet of flowers bought with a credit card?" I took a step toward her. She shrank back, but I didn't stop until I was looking down into her tear-filled eyes. "I told you were beautiful every single day, Vivian." She looked confused. "No, you didn't. You never said it." "I said it when I woke up at 4 in the morning to drive to a job site in the freezing rain," I said, my voice low and intense. "I said it when I worked 14 hours straight, pouring concrete until my back seized up just so we could pay off the mortgage early. I said it when I skipped lunch for 5 years to save for that diamond bracelet Brad stole from you." I held up my hands, my rough, scarred, calloused hands. "Read these hands, Vivian. Every scar is a love letter. Every callus is a compliment. I told you I loved you by making sure you never had to worry about a bill. I told you were beautiful by building a fortress around you so the world couldn't touch you." I lowered my hands. "But you are deaf, Vivian. You only hear what you want to hear. You wanted a fairy tale with cheap words, and you were willing to burn down the real world I built for you to get it." Vivian stared at me. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. The truth of what I said hit her like a physical blow. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that she had traded a mountain of granite for a cloud of smoke. "But I can change," she stammered. "I can learn. Elijah, please. I am 65 years old. I can't start over. I am scared." I looked at her, and the anger finally drained away. All that was left was pity, and pity is a terrible thing to feel for your wife. "You aren't scared of losing me, Vivian," I said softly. "You are scared of being poor. You are scared of the world without the buffer I provided." I checked my watch. "Jason is pulling the truck around. I have to go." Vivian grabbed my sleeve. Her grip was desperate, claw-like. "Where am I supposed to sleep tonight?" she wailed. "The shelter is full. Elijah, you can't leave me here. I am the mother of your child." I looked down at her hand on my sleeve. I gently peeled her fingers off one by one. You have a property in Florida, I said. You own it. It is yours. It is a swamp, she screamed. It is toxic. Then you better start digging, I said. Maybe if you dig deep enough you will find some dignity buried in the mud. I turned away. I started walking toward the exit ramp where the daylight was spilling in. Elijah, she screamed behind me. Elijah. Come back, I kept walking. I didn't speed up. I didn't slow down. I walked with the steady, measured pace of a man who knows exactly where he is going. As I stepped out into the bright afternoon sun, Jason pulled up in my pickup truck. He rolled down the window. He looked at me, then looked past me into the darkness of the garage. Is she okay? Jason asked. She is exactly where she chose to be, I said. I opened the door and climbed into the passenger seat. The truck smelled like old leather and sawdust. It smelled like home. Drive, son, I said. Jason pulled out into traffic. I adjusted the side mirror. For a brief second, I saw a small gray figure standing at the entrance of the garage watching us drive away. She looked like a shadow, and as we turned the corner, the shadow disappeared. I faced forward. The windshield was clear. The road was open. I didn't feel happy. You don't feel happy when you amputate a limb to save your life. You feel pain. You feel the phantom sensation of what used to be there, but you also feel alive. I reached for the radio dial and turned it on. A classic rock station was playing. I hummed along, tapping my fingers on the dashboard. It was time to go to the hardware store. I had a woodworking shop to build, and this time I was going to build it exactly the way I wanted, without anyone telling me it was too loud, too dusty, or too boring. I was Elijah Thorne, and I was finally free. The smell of pot roast and caramelized onions filled the house. It was a rich, heavy scent, the kind of smell that sticks to your ribs and makes a house feel like a home. For 40 years, Vivian had banned pot roast. She said it was peasant food. She said it smelled like poverty. She preferred poached salmon and quinoa, things that looked pretty on a plate, but left you hungry an hour later. Tonight I was cooking pot roast. I was peeling potatoes at the kitchen island, listening to the silence. But it wasn't the empty, echoing silence of the last few weeks. It was a waiting silence, a pregnant silence. I heard the car pull into the driveway. It wasn't Jason's truck. It was a sedan, a luxury sedan. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and walked to the front door. I didn't open it immediately. I watched through the peephole. Maya was standing on the porch, my daughter, the corporate attorney, the woman who could shred a witness in 3 minutes flat. But tonight she didn't look like a shark. She looked like a little girl who had scraped her knee. She was holding a bottle of wine in one hand and clutching her elbows with the other, shivering slightly in the warm evening air. Jason was standing behind her. He wasn't pushing her. He wasn't leading her. He was just there, a silent, steady presence. He gave a small nod toward the door, encouraging her. I opened the door. Maya looked up. Her eyes were red. She had been crying, but she had fixed her makeup. She was trying to be strong. She was trying to be the daughter I was proud of. "Daddy," she whispered. I stood in the doorway. I didn't move aside yet. "Hello, Maya," I said. "Can we come in?" she asked. Her voice cracked. "Please." I stepped back. I opened the door wide. "Come in," I said. "Dinner is almost ready." They walked into the living room. Maya stopped in the center of the rug. She looked around. She looked at the empty spot on the mantel where Vivian's portrait used to hang. I had taken it down yesterday. She looked at the recliner where I sat, now moved to the center of the room, claiming the space. She turned to me. She didn't hug me. Not yet. She needed to say the words first. She needed to clear the air. "I saw the court transcripts," she said. Her voice was steady now, returning to her lawyer cadence. "Jason showed me the files, the credit card statements, the police report, the federal lien on the Florida property." I nodded. And I was wrong," she said. She dropped the wine bottle on the sofa and covered her face with her hands. "God, Dad, I was so wrong." She took a deep breath and lowered her hands. She looked me in the eye. "I treated you like the villain," she said. "I thought you were just a bitter old man who couldn't handle rejection." I defended her. "I told you that you needed therapy. I told you that you were toxic." She laughed, a bitter, sharp sound. "I was defending the woman who was stealing your retirement to buy drugs for her boyfriend. I was defending the woman who tried to bankrupt you. I called myself a lawyer, but I didn't even look at the evidence. I just looked at the tears." Maya, I started to say, but she cut me off. No, Dad, let me say it. You have to let me say it. She stepped closer. Jason told me, she said. He told me about the laughter in the car. He told me how she treated you when she thought she had won. He told me everything. And I realized that for my whole life, I have been watching a play. Mom was the star, and you were just the stagehand moving the props. And I was the audience clapping for the wrong performance. She reached out and took my hand. Her hand was shaking. I am sorry, Daddy. I am so sorry I left you alone when you needed me most. I am sorry I chose the lie because it was prettier than the truth. I looked at my daughter. I saw the regret in her eyes. But more importantly, I saw the respect. She wasn't looking at me like a handyman anymore. She was looking at me like a man. I pulled her into a hug. It was a tight, fierce hug. I felt her sob into my chest, letting go of the tension of the last few weeks. It is okay, baby girl, I whispered into her hair. You are here now. That is what matters. We stood there for a long time. Jason stood by the door watching us, a small smile on his face. He didn't try to join in. He knew this was a moment between a father and a daughter. He was the guard at the gate, making sure the world didn't interrupt. After a while, Maya pulled away. She wiped her eyes. Is that pot roast? She asked, sniffing the air. It is, I said, and I used the good red wine in the gravy. She laughed. Mom would hate that. I smiled. Well, it is a good thing Mom isn't invited to dinner. We moved to the dining room. I had set 3 places. The 4th chair, Vivian's chair, was pushed against the wall in the corner. I didn't remove it from the room, but I removed it from the table. It was a statement. The circle had closed and it was smaller now. We sat down. Jason poured the wine. I carved the roast. The meat fell apart tender and juicy. We filled our plates with potatoes and carrots and gravy. For the first few minutes we ate in silence. But it wasn't awkward. It was the silence of people who are exhausted but safe. It was the silence of soldiers after the battle is over, sitting around a fire, grateful to be alive. Then Jason spoke up. The guys at the station are asking for your brisket recipe, Elijah, he said, taking a bite of a potato. I told them about the time you smoked that brisket for the 4th of July. They want to know your rub mix. I chuckled. You tell them that recipe is a trade secret, son. It goes to the grave with me, or maybe I will leave it to you in the will if you keep acting right. Maya smiled. It was a genuine smile. You know, she said, looking around the room, I thought it would feel empty in here. Without her. She filled up so much space, Dad. Her voice, her drama, her things. She took a sip of wine, but it doesn't feel empty. It feels calm. I put down my fork. I looked at my family, my real family. I realized something today, I said. They both looked at me. I realized that I failed you, Maya. Maya frowned. What, Dad? No. You didn't fail me. You paid for college. You gave me everything. That is exactly how I failed you, I said. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. I worked so hard to give you things, I said. I wanted you to have the dollhouse. I wanted Vivian to have the Cadillac. I wanted you both to have the life I never had growing up. I thought that if I provided enough comfort, I was providing love. I thought that if I built a strong enough house, the people inside would automatically be strong. I shook my head. But I was wrong. I made it too easy. I sheltered you from the consequences of the world. And because I never demanded anything in return, not respect, not gratitude, not loyalty, Vivian thought those things were optional. She thought my labor was her birthright. I looked at Maya. I taught her that she could break me and I would just rebuild myself. I taught her that I was a renewable resource, not a human being. And I almost taught you the same thing. Maya lowered her eyes. When she cheated, I continued, my voice soft but firm. It wasn't just because she was bored. It was because she didn't respect the cost of the life she was living. She didn't know the weight of the bricks. And that is on me. I carried the load so you all could walk free. But you can't respect the burden if you never feel the weight. I looked at Jason. This man here, I said, pointing my fork at him. He knows the weight. He cuts people out of cars. He sees the blood. He knows that life is fragile and expensive. That is why he stood by me. He recognized the work. Jason looked down, embarrassed but proud. Maya looked at her husband. She reached out and touched his hand. You were right, Jason, she whispered. You were right about everything. I picked up my wine glass. We are going to do things differently now, I said. No more free rides. No more pretending that bad behavior is acceptable just to keep the peace. We're going to be a family that values loyalty over luxury. We're going to be a family that tells the truth even when it is ugly, especially when it is ugly. I raised my glass. To the truth, I said. Maya and Jason raised their glasses. To the truth, they echoed. We clinked glasses. The sound was clear and bright. We finished the meal. We talked. We laughed. We didn't talk about Vivian again. We didn't talk about Brad. We talked about Maya's upcoming case. We talked about Jason's plans to go back to school for his paramedic certification. We talked about the woodworking shop I was going to build in the garage. For the first time in 40 years, I wasn't sitting at the head of the table wondering if I was enough. I wasn't wondering if my hands were too rough or my conversation too boring. I was just Elijah. And I was sitting with two people who loved me not for what I could buy them, but for who I was. As I watched Maya laugh at one of Jason's jokes, her eyes crinkling at the corners just like my mother's used to, I felt a deep, settling peace. The storm had stripped the roof off my house, yes, but it had also washed away the rot. The foundation was still there. It was cracked, it was weathered, but it was solid stone. And on that stone, I could build something new, something that would last. I took a bite of the pot roast. It was perfect. Tender, savory, and honest. Just like my life was going to be from now on. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, nestled between a flyer for a lawn care service and a coupon book for the local grocery store. It was a thick, heavy envelope with the logo of St. Mary's Hospital embossed in the corner. It was addressed to me, Elijah Thorne, as the primary policyholder of the insurance plan that had covered Vivian on the night of the accident. I sat on my front porch, the morning sun warming the wooden planks I had just refinished. My dog, a rescue golden retriever named Buster, was sleeping at my feet. I opened the envelope with my pocket knife slicing through the paper with a satisfying rip. Inside was a legal notification. A copy of a malpractice lawsuit filed by Mr. Bradley Miller against Dr. Marcus Evans, the chief of surgery at St. Mary's. I adjusted my reading glasses and began to read. The plaintiff, Mr. Miller, alleges that during the emergency separation procedure performed on the night of August 12th, Dr. Evans used excessive force and surgical aggression, resulting in the permanent loss of reproductive function and severe irreversible nerve damage to the groin area. The plaintiff seeks $10 million in damages for loss of consortium psychological distress and the permanent inability to perform sexual acts. I read the paragraph twice. Then I read it a third time. A slow smile spread across my face. It wasn't a smile of joy. It was the smile of a man who watches a bridge collapse exactly the way he predicted it would when he pulled the support pin. You see, there was one detail I hadn't told anyone. Not Jason, not Maya, not Sam the detective. It was the final brick in the wall I had built around my revenge. Brad Miller, or Chadwick, or whatever he called himself, was a predator. I knew that from the file Sam gave me. He didn't use a gun to rob women. He didn't use a knife. He used his charm. He used his body. He seduced lonely women, made them feel desirable, made them feel young again, and then he used that intimacy to empty their bank accounts. His weapon was his sexuality. It was the tool of his trade. And like any good contractor knows, if you want to stop a man from working, you don't just fire him, you take away his tools. I put the letter down and picked up my phone. I dialed a number that was saved in my favorites, Dr. Marcus Evans. Marcus wasn't just the surgeon on call that night. Marcus has been my golf partner every Sunday morning for 25 years. We have walked thousands of miles of fairway together. We have shared cigars, scotch, and secrets. He is a man who grew up in the same rough neighborhood I did, a man who pulled himself up by his bootstraps to become one of the best trauma surgeons in the state. He answered on the second ring. "Hello, Elijah," his deep voice rumbled. "I assume you got the paperwork." "I did, Marcus," I said, watching a cardinal land on the bird feeder. $10 million. He thinks highly of himself. "He is flailing, Elijah," Marcus said calmly. "He has no case. The medical review board has already cleared me. The adhesive you used, Titan Bond 5000, it is nasty stuff. It bonded at a cellular level with the epidermis and the dermis. There was no way to separate them without excising the tissue." "I remember," I said. "I remember the phone call." I closed my eyes and let my mind drift back to that night. The night Jason called me from the ambulance. The night I put on my suit and drove to the hospital. I hadn't just driven blindly. As soon as I hung up with Jason, I had called Marcus. It was 3 in the morning, but I knew he was on call because we had discussed it at the clubhouse the Sunday before. Elijah Marcus had answered, his voice groggy. "Is everything okay, Marcus? I need a favor," I had said. My voice was cold then, cold as ice. "My wife is coming into your ER. She is stuck to a man." "I know," Marcus said. "Dispatch just alerted us. I am heading in now." "Marcus, listen to me," I said. "That man, he isn't just an affair. He is a con artist. He preys on women. He uses them and throws them away. He is destroying my family." There was a silence on the line. Marcus is a doctor, but he is also a father of 3 daughters. He understands the instinct to protect. "What are you asking me, Elijah?" "I am asking you to save their lives," I said. "Do whatever is medically necessary to separate them. I don't want them to die." I paused. "But Marcus, that glue is strong. It is industrial grade. I imagine you will have to cut deep to get it off. I am a surgeon, Elijah. I cut as deep as I have to. I imagine," I continued, my voice steady, "that in a situation like that, saving the organ is secondary to saving the patient from infection and trauma. If there is a choice between a clean separation and preserving functionality, I trust you will make the safe choice." The silence on the other end lasted for 10 seconds. Elijah Marcus said finally, "You know I took an oath to do no harm." "I know," I said, "but allowing a wolf to keep his teeth so he can bite another sheep, isn't that a form of harm too?" I heard the sound of Marcus's car door closing. I heard the engine start. "I will assess the situation when I get there," Marcus said. "But if the adhesive has compromised the structural integrity of the tissue, well, we often have to make sacrifices to prevent gangrene. It is a standard medical protocol." "That is all I ask," I said. "Standard protocol. Just make sure he never hurts anyone again." "See you at the hospital, Elijah." The call ended. Now, sitting on my porch 3 weeks later, I listened to Marcus's voice on the phone. He came after me with a shark lawyer at first, Marcus said, chuckling. But once the toxicology report came back showing he was high on cocaine during the incident, and once I presented the photos of the tissue damage caused by the chemical reaction of the glue, his lawyer dropped him. Now he is filing pro se. He is representing himself. "He won't win," I said. "No, he won't." Marcus agreed. "But Elijah, you should have seen him when I told him the prognosis." "Tell me." "It was the morning after the surgery," Marcus recounted. "I walked into his room. He was still groggy. I told him the separation was successful. I told him Vivian was going to be fine, mostly cosmetic scarring on her thighs. But then I had to tell him about his own situation." Marcus paused. "I told him that the skin of his genitals had fused so completely with Vivian's thigh that we had to perform a radical skin graft and reconstructive surgery. I told him that while he would still be able to urinate, the nerve endings responsible for excitement had been severed, irreversibly." And he screamed, "Elijah." He didn't scream about the pain. He screamed, "How am I going to work?" That is what he said. Not "How am I going to love?" or "How am I going to have a family?" He said, "How am I going to work?" I nodded, just as I thought. It was his job. "He is finished," Elijah Marcus said. "He is physically healed, but as a man, he is a retired player. He can charm women with his words all he wants, but he can never seal the deal. The weapon is decommissioned." "Thank you, Marcus," I said. "Don't thank me, Elijah. I just removed a tumor. Sometimes tumors look like cancer cells. Sometimes they look like 45-year-old con men. It was a medical necessity." We said our goodbyes. I hung up the phone. I looked out at the street. The neighborhood was quiet. The sun was climbing higher in the sky. I thought about Brad Miller. I thought about him sitting in a jail cell right now awaiting trial for drug possession and theft. He was broke. He was facing years in prison. His reputation was destroyed. And now he had to live with the knowledge that even if he got out, even if he tried to start over, he would never be able to use his favorite trick again. He was a soldier without a rifle, a snake without venom. I felt a deep, profound sense of closure. It wasn't just about punishing him for sleeping with Vivian. That was a betrayal, yes. But the stealing, the manipulation, the way he targeted older women and drained their life savings, that was evil. And I had surgically removed that evil from the world. I picked up the letter from the hospital. I folded it neatly. I didn't throw it away. I put it in my pocket. I would frame it later. I would hang it in my new woodworking shop right next to my first hammer. A reminder that some tools are for building and some tools are for dismantling. And the most dangerous tool of all is a patient man who knows exactly which glue to use. I stood up and stretched. My back cracked a familiar comforting sound. "Come on, Buster," I said to the dog. "Let's go for a walk." We walked down the driveway past the empty spot where Vivian's Cadillac used to be. I didn't miss the car. I didn't miss the noise. I walked past Brad's house across the street. It was dark. There was a foreclosure notice taped to the front door. The grass was getting long. I stopped for a moment and looked at the upstairs window, the window where I had seen him wink at me that morning. "Wink now, you son of a bucky," I whispered. I turned and kept walking. The air smelled like pine needles and freshly cut grass. It smelled like a future that belonged entirely to me. I had paid a high price for this freedom. I had lost my savings. I had lost the woman I thought I would grow old with. But I had kept my dignity. I had protected my daughter. And I had made sure that the man who tried to destroy us would never ever be able to destroy another family again. That was worth every penny. I whistled a tune as I turned the corner, the dog trotting happily beside me. It was a good day to be Elijah Thorne. It was a good day to be a builder. And tomorrow, I would start building something new. The for sale sign in the front yard was gone. In its place was a sold sticker slapped diagonally across the wood in bright red letters. I stood on the sidewalk looking up at the house one last time. It was a good house. I should know. I replaced the roof myself in '98. I installed those double-hung windows in 2005 to keep the draft out. I laid the brick for that walkway on a Saturday morning while Vivian complained about the noise. For 40 years, this structure was my identity. It was the physical manifestation of my love for my family. I thought that if I kept the walls strong, the people inside would be safe. I thought that if I kept the furnace running, their hearts would stay warm. But I was wrong. A house is just wood and stone. It can't make people love you. It can't make them loyal. And it certainly can't keep out the rot if the rot is already inside. I walked up the driveway to my pickup truck. It was loaded down with the few boxes I decided to keep. My tools, my clothes. A box of photo albums that I had carefully curated, removing certain faces from the pages. And in the passenger seat, sitting tall and proud, was Buster, my golden retriever. He didn't care about the divorce. He didn't care about the lawsuit. He just knew we were going for a ride. And that was enough to make him the happiest soul in Georgia. I climbed into the driver's seat. I didn't look back at the front door. I put the truck in gear and pulled away. As I turned the corner, leaving the tree-lined street of my past behind, I waited for the sadness to hit me. I waited for the tears. But they didn't come. Instead, I felt a strange lightness in my chest. It was the feeling of taking off a heavy work boot at the end of a long, hard day. I didn't move into a condo. I didn't move into an apartment complex with thin walls and nosy neighbors. I did something that the old Elijah, the responsible Elijah, never would have done. I bought a bus. Well, not a bus exactly. It was a 40-foot Winnebago, a rolling home. It had a king-sized bed, a kitchenette, and a windshield big enough to see the whole world. I paid cash for it with the money from the house sale. For the first time in my life, I wasn't investing in real estate. I was investing in the horizon. I drove west. I have always wanted to see the West. Vivian hated long drives. She hated camping. She hated anything that didn't involve room service and a concierge. So for 40 years, I stayed put. I built decks I never sat on. I built pools I never swam in. But now the only schedule I had was the rising and setting of the sun. I drove through Alabama. I drove through the flat, endless fields of Mississippi. I stopped in New Orleans not to find the loan sharks that were hunting Brad, but to eat a beignet and listen to jazz on Frenchman Street. I sat in a corner booth, tapping my foot to the music, realizing that for the first time no one was checking their watch. No one was sighing loudly to let me know they were bored. I drove through Texas. It took 3 days to cross that state. I saw oil rigs pumping in the twilight. I saw thunderstorms roll across the plains like angry gods. I slept in RV parks where I met people who didn't know my name, didn't know my shame, and didn't care about my bank account. To them, I was just Elijah, the guy with the friendly dog and the good stories. I remember one night in Amarillo. I was sitting by a campfire with a retired couple from Wisconsin. We were drinking cheap beer and roasting marshmallows. The husband asked me what I did before I retired. I was a builder, I said. What did you build, he asked. I thought about it for a moment. I thought about the house in Atlanta. I thought about the family that had crumbled. I built a lot of things, I said, watching the flames. But I think I am finally building the right thing now. What is that, a life, I said. Just a life. We crossed into Arizona a week later. The landscape changed. The green trees disappeared, replaced by red rock and cactus. The air was dry and clean. It felt like it was scrubbing my soul. And finally we made it. The Grand Canyon. I parked the RV on the south rim. I stepped out. The wind was whipping around me, cold and sharp. I walked to the edge. Nothing prepares you for it. You can see pictures, you can watch movies, but until you stand there and look down into that vast, ancient scar in the earth, you don't understand. It is huge. It is silent. It is indifferent. I set up a folding chair near the edge, careful to stay behind the railing. Buster lay down beside me, resting his head on his paws. I opened a cooler I had brought with me. I pulled out a bottle of beer. It was cold. Condensation dripped down the glass. I took a sip. It was the best beer I have ever tasted. I sat there for hours watching the sun go down. The canyon changed colors. It went from orange to red to purple to deep blue. It was a slow, majestic show put on by God himself, and I had a front row seat. I thought about Brad Miller. He was probably sitting in a cell right now, staring at a concrete wall. I thought about the Florida house sinking into the swamp, weighed down by debt and poison. I thought about all the noise and the anger and the betrayal. Here on the edge of this canyon, all of that felt very small. It felt like dust in the wind. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it at first. I didn't want to break the spell, but it buzzed again and again, a persistent, desperate rhythm. I pulled it out. The screen was bright in the gathering darkness. It was a text message from a number I hadn't saved, but I recognized the area code. I opened it. Elijah, please. It is Vivian. I know you blocked my calls. I am at a shelter in downtown. It is horrible here. They stole my shoes. I have no money for food. I just need a little help. Just $50. Please. For old time's sake. I am scared. I stared at the words. $50. I could send it. It wouldn't hurt me. I had money in the bank now. I was comfortable. I could press a few buttons and send her money. It would be the kind thing to do. It would be the Christian thing to do. But then I looked at Buster. I looked at his gray muzzle. He had stayed loyal to me his whole life. He had never lied. He had never cheated. He had never made me feel small. And I remembered what I told Maya. You can't respect the burden if you never feel the weight. Vivian wasn't asking for help because she had learned. She was asking for help because she was uncomfortable. She was still looking for the easy way out. She was still looking for the contractor to come fix the leak she had caused. If I sent that money, I wouldn't be helping her. I would be robbing her of the only lesson that could possibly save her soul, the lesson of consequences. I didn't type a reply. I didn't write, I told you so. I didn't write, I hope you are suffering. I simply tapped the 3 dots in the corner of the screen. Block contact. Confirm yes. The phone went silent. I put it face down on the table next to my beer. I looked back out at the canyon. The first stars were appearing in the sky. They were bright and sharp, unaffected by the city lights I had left behind. I took a deep breath. The air tasted like sagebrush and stone. I am 72 years old. My joints ache when it rains. My eyes aren't what they used to be. But sitting there under that vast western sky, I felt young. I realized that freedom isn't free. It costs everything you have. It costs your comfort. It costs your history. It costs your heart. But as I took another sip of my beer and scratched Buster behind the ears, I knew one thing for sure. It was a bargain. I am Elijah Thorne. I used to build houses for other people to live in. Now I am finally living in my own. Loyalty is not a transaction. It is the foundation of a life built together. I spent 40 years building walls to shelter my family, never realizing the termite of betrayal was eating away the support beams from the inside. We often mistake silence for peace and endurance for love. But dignity has a limit. When someone shows you they clearly don't value your sacrifice, believe them the first time. Walking away isn't about hatred. It's about respecting yourself enough to know that your table shouldn't have a seat for those who starve your soul while feasting on your labor. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us bring more stories like this to you. And tell me in the comments below, at what point would you have walked away? I read every single comment. Until next time, remember to build your life on solid ground. Goodbye for now.